Good afternoon, Dr. DeGroot, and I'm hoping that I'm pronouncing that correctly.
That is correct. That is correct.
We want to look at education and the structuring of class and population control, looking at a history of the Black Studies Department and why there was a need for Black Studies in the first place. So I would like for you, if you would, to talk to us a bit about the purpose of education in the first place, and if you could kind of address the philosophical and psychological aspects of shaping one's worldview in the context of mind control and human possibility.
Okay, I'm going to really try to remember all that, and if I get off kilter, you can kind of draw me back. First of all, looking at the purpose of education, I think the purpose of education in any society is to facilitate the development of a mature mind. I think that that's the goal, that that's the focus, to bring a person into an awareness of their full humanness. As it relates to the structuring of classes and controlling the minds of the people, the education that we receive is reflective of the dominant societies or the dominant culture's worldview. As it relates to African American people, I think ultimately, when you look at the history of how we have been folded into the curriculum, as we've been folded into, if you will, American history, it's certainly not a positive picture. And that not being a positive picture, we have to take a look at that. And then we can understand what the motivations are, or why, or how African-American children, in particular, youth, adults in the educational system, have been controlled. Well, fundamentally, Europeans had to somehow make okay their oppression. They had to make okay their aggression. They had to make okay their theft, their rape. And the way that they did that was to fold it into a level of normalcy in an educational arena, which suggested that these people, meaning African-American people, were deserving of such treatment. That somehow African-American people, or people of African descent, Africans, were lacking what Europeans had as it related to intelligence, morality, physical capacity, spirituality, even having a soul. All these things were questioned by people, that various individuals within the educational system. When I think about, John Newton, who penned the Amazing Grace, and as we look at his behavior, again, this is an individual that said that Black people were without souls and thus not destined for the next life, which then, in his mind, I imagine, justified his raping girls and women on slave ships. You see, so you look at that behavior, and then you look at statements by Carl von Linnaeus, a preeminent biologist, best known, said to be the father of anthropology, who is best known for the classification of species and genus and phylum, all of the things that we know as it relates to biological classification. He then put in the 1700s, into the pot, his notion of race classification. And of course, fundamentally, this becomes part of our education, because Carl von Linnaeus becomes someone that's unavoidable if you study high school biology, for example. And what he suggests is that we are by nature, by a fact of science, inferior. That we are lustful, cunning, lazy, governed by caprice. These are the things he said were inherent, scientifically proven qualities of people of African descent. So one has to ask, why would he say such a thing? Well, you're talking about 1777, we're talking about a period of time when American chattel slavery was existing in the country. And again, we have to ease the mind and the conscience, not only of white Americans, but of those looking on at America, so that they too can feel comfortable with this peculiar institution called slavery. So then it moves along a continuum, and so those individuals in various branches of science, of literature, begin to throw their parts into it to ease the public conscience society's conscience. Now, I haven't spoken about what that does to the African. I'm talking about what that education has done to rest the mind and conscience of white people, to allow them to go to church on Sunday and not feel any guilt, to allow them to barter, to sell away little children and to rape little girls, and for that to somehow be okay when I sing hymns on Sunday. Those are the things that I'm talking about, that you begin to, that's the structural racism that exists to maintain the population who is doing the oppressing. These people are the ones we want to continue to feel good about it because we profit by it. Because, you know, by and large, African enslavement was about money and power. So now we have to look at these people that now they're here, and they have, been freed. And what happens upon freeing these people that you have consistently demonized, dehumanized, victimized, and oppressed? How do you coexist? And some, like Thomas Jefferson, didn't believe it was possible to coexist. Suggests that they should be moved way beyond, back to Africa, away from the memory, the 10,000 recollections, to quote him, of what has been done to them. That he believed would end up causing the extermination of one or the other race, white or black. He didn't believe they could coexist because we'd remember what was done to us. So what do? You erase the memory. And education in America has done just that. They have placed us in history in a way that allows them to seem favorable. Case in point, the Negro problem. The Negro problem, which was part of the white man's burden, they kind of reframed this whole enslavement issue by saying, we're just trying to civilize you. Mm-hmm. Do you see? So again, we have to understand how that operates systemically. So now what we're saying in an educational arena is that basically this whole idea of enslavement was for your own good. Mm-hmm. And then we have to now we've already convinced white people of that, so that they can, again, go to church on Sunday. And I say that deliberately because that's, in fact, what they did. After lynchings, after rapes, they went to church, you know. So we have to understand, how does one reconcile that inconsistency with considering oneself superior and yet behaving in a barbaric way? So now we've solved the problem of the dissonance associated with the white people who might think, maybe this isn't right what we're doing to these people. Just to make certain that didn't happen, they justified it by, again, remember, one, we are scientifically proven to be somehow inferior, and two, through the benevolence of white people, we're going to simply help you become more civilized. Mm-hmm. Okay, now we have to convince those who were enslaved and their descendants that this is also okay. Mm-hmm. So what we do is, not only do we give you the same education we give the white child about how much better off you are now and how horrific a people that you are, you know, people like Aristotle, who said that black people were natural slaves, that by a peculiar act of nature, the color of skin, the skin raises the presumption of slavery, and that we were permanently suited for a laborious class. And this is, of course, Aristotle, and most folks think he was smart. So again, it feeds into that notion. But you got to remember, as white people are hearing it, black people are hearing it also. And yet, trying to retain, as we have, an intrinsic feeling of nobility, an intrinsic feeling of worth in the midst of someone dehumanizing you for centuries. So now what happens to the curricular materials? Well, we simply, we take out anything that would cast a negative look at the oppressor. And we then exponentially reflect any of the deficits or any of the challenges that are existing within the African culture or African American culture as well. We heighten all of the information that we can share about any of the deficits or any of the, again, the challenges that have affected the people that you have so long oppressed. In other words, we blame it on them. And we're just trying to help you because you're just, again, inherently defective. And so after you hear that after a while, and then you have curricular materials, and then you have things like media that then feeds into it. So all of these become, they conspire and they are complicit in maintaining this notion that this is what you are. Everything from, and it's so interesting because it shows itself over and over in film.
Yes.
You know, what do we reward? We reward the images that we have projected. We're not going to reward the image of a noble, aspiring man of African descent, but we will reward a pimp, a hustler, a criminal, and we're not going to reward a noble, beautiful, moral, healthy black woman, hence precious. We're going to again reward you to perpetuate the images that we need you to continue to have of yourself, and then we'll also continue to justify for white people why it always is this way. Do you see? Yes. So education has, while we have, Carter G. Woodson made it very clear that we were miseducated. Mm-hmm. And he didn't have any more words to say than miseducated, because we could put a whole lot more than miseducated on that. We were miseducated, we were dehumanized, we were brainwashed, we were beaten into submission, we were victimized by learned helplessness. All of those things would feed into that miseducation. And so when we look at the residual impact of that, when we look at what does that do to a people, you begin to question your fundamental self. Yes. And when you have detached that person from their culture, again, we had to be very careful to destroy all of the African roots from which we came, the rituals, the customs, the practices that built village and community. Those things were severed, as well as the language. And what we understand now, based on data that has been collected in contemporary society, that severing people from their culture is tantamount to the death of the self. It's completely. The death of the culture is tantamount to the death of the self.
Could you say that again, please?
That when you destroy the links that a people have, any people, with their culture, you destroy them. Because it is by far more important, the ideas of community and family and custom that make up what we call culture is far more important than any physical disaster that can happen to a people. Because you've removed them from the essence of who they are. And in the words of Randall Robinson, that the worst thing that you can do to a people is to rob them of the memory of themselves. And so if you don't know who you are, you most certainly can't figure out where you're going, which is what we're seeing. And in addition to that, what we have folded into that are the contemporary issues, the mess that everyone's in, the materialism, the drug abuse, the over-sexualizing of, everything, right? So you begin to look at that and you fold it on top of what I call post-traumatic slave syndrome. All of the qualities that I'm saying are the residual impact of that, those centuries of oppression unaddressed, and the perpetual miseducation, yes, and demonizing of all that is black. And when you look at that, you're looking at the actual destruction of a people. That's what it results in. If, of course, you don't do anything about it. If you don't stop and go, whoa, someone's trying to sell me some strange Kool-Aid here, and I'm not buying it. When you take it upon yourself to educate yourself, when you take it upon yourself to not allow the media to teach you who you are, when you take it upon yourself to control what is going into the hearts, minds, and bodies of your own children, and that you don't leave that to a system that has spent most of its time trying to avoid the truth, hence the need for Black history, the need for historically Black institutions. Because the only way to balance that is to maintain, is to remember Sankofa. The only way to retain that sense of self, to rebuild that sense of self, is to have an understanding of who you are. And you cannot know that without understanding your own real history, which is the reason why we have to have it. Because if we don't do it, there is a disincentive for contemporary educational institutions because, well, who looks bad? Who's going to look badly in this? And like I tell people all the time, they're not going to let little Cindy and Miss Ann feel uncomfortable about the lies that have been told them all this time about their history. Because you have to understand, little white children have received the same miseducation, misdirection, lies that we have. And so they perpetuate it with their children as well. So unless someone steps out of this cycle of insanity and says, okay, wait a minute now, this is not correct. And then we begin to not only state the truth, but to produce curricular materials and insist that they be infused into the curriculum. Mm-hmm. And as to whether or not we can ever have a level playing field, I think that when that notion of send us your poor, you're tired, your huddled masses yearning to breathe free, if the whole notion of liberty for all people, and the pursuit of happiness was true for all people, then maybe so. If we stood firm on the principles that America lied about, if we actually lived them, if institutions were in fact just and equitable, but those are the ifs. If all of those, then certainly you could have a level playing field. But like I said, how we get to that, if we can get to that, that's going to be the choice of a collective will of people that are going to not by folks blowing up stuff, not by force or disaster, but by an act of human will. If we can do this by an act of human will, well, most certainly we can level the playing field. But who's going to convince, who's going to put the bell on the cat? Who's going to convince this giant that they should share? Who's going to confront the lies so much so that people have to see the truth of their own history, their own barbarism? And how are they going to in any way appreciate the inclusion of the African contribution? We'll let you talk about your fruit and your festivals. We'll let you talk about a little bit about your art and your dance and your clothes. And we will present that as your history, as your contribution, as if African people did not contribute, the kind of knowledge that stabilizes civilizations. Because that's the African contribution. But they would better like you to believe, well, you have interesting food. And isn't that nice music? But we don't want you to believe that your scientists, your doctors, your architects, your engineers, you name it, on every single level, to the inventions that make and allow life to be so warm and fuzzy in America, as if Africans had no part in that. And that's the travesty, you see. But it would mean to open that door, to open the door to the contributions, and not only of Africans, but of other people of color that have been summarily erased from curricular materials. So to continually, by omission, train and educate every child in America to believe that everything that is of worth and of value has come from Europeans.
Let me ask you, what does that do to white people to be fed a continuous diet of distortion and lies, because it is. Mm-hmm. What does that do to their, not so much their personality, but their psyche?
Oh, I'll tell you exactly what it does. It produces the pathology associated with unearned privilege. Unearned privilege. In other words, you have this pathology in white people that they are inherently superior. So it produces this very sick and warped, distorted perspective of their relationship to everything else in the universe. And like people believe that, the sun revolved around the earth. White people think that everything revolves around them. It's the same thing. And it's as ignorant as earth being flat. So what it produces in white people is a pathology of unearned privilege to such a degree that they are confused when they're not entitled from their vantage point to run it, to control it, to benefit. You see, they believe you have right now, matter of fact, if you look at the neo-Nazi movement and the rise of the skinhead generation, that whole crew, which is, by the way, growing exponentially as well, but we're not hearing about that, but you will hear about the Crips and the Bloods and oh my God, those Mexican gangs. But nobody's talking about the Klan, which is tripled, and keep a close look at the Tea Party. So what I'm saying here is that you have young people that now, because of the economic situation that, by the way, Europeans placed America in, that are now going, well, wait a minute. Every generation has always been able to benefit more, to somehow have more, to somehow, get more as it relates to being white. So now you have white males that are saying, well, my God, I can't even afford to buy a home in the same neighborhood of my parents. Whose fault is that? Oh, it must be, it's those immigrants. Just look at them, do the math, and look at what's going on in this country. It must be those immigrants. Because you see, I, as a white male, having earned nothing, am deserving of more than them. That's the pathology. Even though they've actually produced nothing, they believe that they have this unearned privilege, that I should have the best job. I should be able to just, regardless of my credit, go in and get a house in any part of the country that I wish. I should have the preferential treatment. That is unearned privilege that they're expecting to have. And when they're unable to get that unearned privilege, they explode and implode. Hence, the gentleman that flew his plane into the IRS. You mess with my objects, the things that I believe that I'm supposed to have, I implode and explode. And unfortunately, as it relates to people of color, and particularly people of African descent in this country, they become then, the scapegoat for it. It's them. Oh, yeah, and it's those Mexicans coming across the border that suddenly are becoming a problem because I can't get my unearned privileges. I can't get those needs met, which means that I should have bigger, better, newer, more. Unearned privilege, and it metastasizes into a pathology that again results in sometimes outward violence or inward violence.
Let me ask you, if you would, to deal briefly with the economics of miseducation, even within the school budget itself. New York State has a school budget of $80 billion. And so school education is a multi-billion-dollar industry. Mm-hmm. How does this racism play in the economy, in the distribution of all of that?
Well, we have to keep a perpetual underclass. Mm. And so, even if you were to look at, it's very interesting, the correspondence of Jefferson and Adams, you start looking at who they call the founding fathers, and you look at their edict. They said, a man should be able to, and they agreed. They said, just let them believe they're free. This is white people. They said, just let them believe they're free. Let them stand on a corner and scream to the top of their lungs that they have their rights to free speech, and let them speak. But we don't have to hear them. So it's an interesting reality as it relates to the economy, because America's always had to have an underclass. The new permanent underclass swiftly becoming the Latino Hispanic population, who is now competing for the bottom. And it's amazing with African American people, because when you start looking at Carnegie, the folks who actually developed our original structure of education, they weren't trying to build corporate folks and people who were going to advance to be scholars. They wanted blue-collar workers to work in their factories. That's what the goal of American education was. This is not, this is not hidden. All you have to do is read what they've said about it. They said they're not trying to produce people who are going to go out and be their competitors. They wanted to raise the level of education just so much so that they could work for them, for the things they ran. Ford industry. And you start looking at all these folks. It wasn't about trying to produce a mature mind that would then become their competitors. No. And so it doesn't surprise me because, and the truth is, it hasn't changed. You see, in that system, that construct, it's flawed. Everyone knows it's flawed. And yet there's been no attempt. Why? To just overhaul the whole thing. I tell people, I said, listen, just don't do whatever they're doing in school and you'll do better. Honestly, just come up with something different and you'll do better. Because we already know what it's producing. And it's certainly not producing mature minds on any count. And just because you can jump through the hoops and you can even, cross the T and dot the I and get the A, does not mean that you're educated. You see? So I'm saying, at what point do we look at the system? But to look at that would then begin to look at those that created it. And they too would be flawed. And as if we don't know that they were inherently racist people in the first place, who were bent on a material existence that they completely controlled and benefited from, and that their heirs would benefit from. And that's not even all white people. They didn't even want all white people to benefit from it. Only a select elite few. So this is the structure of American education, and yet no one has saw fit to go, well, maybe we need to rework this. Right, well, who would benefit? You? It's like, when you look at this, this is a perfect example of it. When in Ethiopia, we saw the huge drought, the horrific, advancement of the desert, if you will, in Ethiopia. They knew about that 20 years before it happened, at least 20 years before it ever occurred. And the reason why I know that is my sister was among some of the young people who were brought in on the scientific inquiry about what was going on regionally, geographically in that area. She studied in school that eventually the desert, they saw it happening. So let's ask this question. It's a fundamental question. If they knew 20 years before it happened that it was going to happen, why didn't they intervene? Why didn't they, say, well, y'all might want to move? Or maybe start building an infrastructure that could sustain itself? Well, here's a question you have to ask, which is what every country in the world, imperialistic, regardless of whether they're capitalist, communist, I don't care who they were. They looked and they went, any oil there? I don't know, I'm sorry, diamonds? Were there any diamonds there? Let's see. Are there any natural resource? Gold? None of that? Then why would we? Oh, you mean just the people? We would intervene to support their system, to help them, to rescue their children and their children? No, there's no interest in it for us. We don't do it just for people. Even now, the only time they really actually help is when there's a disaster, because it just looks so darn bad. But if they would have put all the energy in Haiti that they put into Haiti during the devastation, prior to the devastation in terms of investing in the country, how much further along would the infrastructure of Haiti have been? But no, everybody rushes in once the disaster happens, but not to really help you become an autonomous, self-sustained culture. No, because that would then cut into my unearned privilege. Just my opinion, by the way.
Let me ask you this. If you look at the world and its struggle right now to survive,
yeah,
can the world survive without a level playing field, without Africans being healed? Can the world survive? It's like saying, can the world survive without Africa and African people?
Well, it's like I know someone did a movie, A Day Without a Mexican, not too long ago. Help Americans understand how important.
I don't think
No,
so.
but I'm talking about.
But I
know
don't
what you're talking
believe
about. I know
that
about the truth of it.
that it's. I think if you were to try to erase completely any number of cultures from the earth, to not acknowledge them, would result in an imbalance that would threaten the existence of the entire world. So I think that Africa, especially given what Africa is, who Africa is, most certainly not. Most certainly not. And there is a myth that's possible. I think people believe and they function with the notion that they can continue to eat at the vitals of this continent, to eat at the vitals of its people, and that there would be no consequence. It's like anything else in the world. The universe functions with a balance, and Africa is at the center of that balance on so many levels, the cradle of civilization. So of course not at all. But you'd be hard pressed to convince folks who believe that that they can in fact, again, look at what has happened to the native people here. The Native Americans, deliberate, conscious, and admittedly so. And you don't believe there's going to be a consequence? I mean, even science teaches you that for every action there is a corresponding reaction. Nature teaches you that. Do you think it's any less true with people and with the cradle of civilization itself, the continent of Africa? That's foolish to believe. And yet, there are those who live with the blindfolds on. It's so long as I'm getting mine right now today, that suits me. And that's kind of what we're looking at right now. People who are going, I don't really care about tomorrow, so long as I get what I want today. Yeah. And that's the sad part of it. And we're going to figure it out the hard way. I'd like for us to kind of figure it out another way, without blood and carnage and devastation and horrific, unimaginable horrors. I'm hoping. But we don't seem to be getting it, and a level playing field would require that, it's just that, it's leveled.
Well, I talked about that only because President Barack Obama, an African brother, promised that. So I just wanted to throw that in for you to deal with.
He promised something that maybe he himself, as an individual, as a person of great conscience, and I have a tremendous amount of respect for President Barack Obama, please know, and have met him briefly, he and his wife, and he believes that with every breath of his body, he believes it. But he is functioning within an inherently corrupt system. And it's like someone in the mud trying to remain clean. And that's my take on it. He took the helm when the ship was halfway in the water. And I believe that he will try with absolute earnest truth and sincerity to do that the best way he can. And you look at something like healthcare and the fight that he's getting from people about folks being able, it just, and maybe it's just me. Maybe it's just me, but that just doesn't seem that deep to me. It doesn't seem selfish and horrible and ill thought that every human being in this country should have health care. That's not deep. And yet you would think people who are fundamentally consider themselves to be intelligent people who are running things on high levels, are behaving like barbarians, like idiots. And I look at that and I'm going, why? Because the fundamental belief of what your premise is, there's no need. There are people who are acceptable to be gone. I don't care. Doesn't matter. They're not necessary. If you take right now, I remember they had a situation that happened in the Pacific Northwest. I think they called them the mouse wars. Well, where these farmers had all these farms, and they were really, they were having really a lot of trouble with these coyotes, right? And coyotes were coming in, and they were just doing stuff. So they actually killed almost all of the coyotes. And the next year, they had a run of mice that destroyed everything. Destroyed everything. There's a whole, and I remember seeing that because they're going, these are pests. We don't need them. Yeah, and they thought they didn't. And then the mice destroyed everything the next year.
Dr. Grace, I have just two other questions to ask you. One, I want to deal briefly, if you would, with Africa. And what do you see on the horizon for Africa? You've been there, and how similar is what happened to us has happened to them? Is there a meaningful difference in their relationship with Europeans and the way they perceive Europeans, especially if you look at Christianity? And you know, I was there and I interviewed a lot of people.
Yeah.
And I asked them if, and everywhere you see this white Jesus on the back of trucks and buses.
Sure,
and cars.
sure.
And I said, do you really believe that image is really the Son, the only begotten Son of God? And almost 90% of them said yes. And I said, well, if you believe that image is the Son of God, do you believe white people, since that image is of a white man, is closer to God than you? And they would think about it. And then they would say, yes, look how they live, and look how we live. Certainly, God has blessed them more. So what do you see and feel in terms of
there's a lot of, people will be really probably angry with me. But the evangelical movement is huge, for example, in Ghana. It's huge. And, it's interesting to me to see how it's being promoted. I saw a number of television. It was very, I would say, it was very, very difficult to watch these TV and evangelical kind of things. It was like nothing I'd ever seen before. Very disturbing, where they'd have, women coming out and barking like dogs and crawling on the floor. It was always a woman, almost always, that I ever saw. I don't think I ever saw a man possessed, and that the demons, and then the whole, laying on of hands. Now, if you begin to look at that and look at African rituals associated with African culture, and them saying, well, those rituals are, you're worshiping, idols. You're into, worshiping evil and Satan and all that, which are what the white missionaries told them. But the evangelical movement said, yeah, but you could be possessed. Mm-hmm. Do you see what I'm saying?
Yes.
That's okay for you to crawl around and roll your eyes back in your head and to scream and to hoop because you're possessed. But that over there that you were doing, that ritual that you were doing, and that your medicine men and your healers were dealing with, that stuff's backwards. But this is okay. Because now you're feeding into another system.
Which I control.
Right. There you go. So I think that, and yet at the same time, there's a considerable number of Africans that are Muslim, as you know. Consider, and 20% of the Africans taken that were enslaved were Muslim, and were considered heathen religions. Interesting. But yeah, I think that what I see in Africa is very disturbing in some ways, and I'm certainly not an authority. Africa has managed to survive through lots, and I would tend to believe that it will continue to, but not without infiltration, not without colonization, not without more of that, until not just in Africa, but there is a sense of the just intrinsic wrongness of that among those who would be invading, and there are those who are watching very closely who aren't likely to go along with that. But you have what is feeding it and fueling it is materialism.
Okay.
And so once you say to me, for example, Nestle's, many years ago, everybody heard about the Nestle's crisis. When Nestle's took a formula which was unacceptable here. I have this article. Nestle's had this formula, which actually didn't meet Food and Drug Administration approval here, that was approved, however, to sell to other countries. And truth be told, it was very nutritious by comparison to anything that they had. They didn't have anything like this baby formula. Nothing comparable. Nothing comparable. So they reconcile, which is called simple actuarial analysis, by the way. Simple actuarial analysis. They just said, well, we've done a good thing. We've done nothing wrong. We've given them something that is better than anything they currently have. That's how they reconciled that. But that formula had to be mixed with water. And they did not have clean water, and it killed their babies, killed them. Yeah. And they said, well, we have no responsibility in that. We gave them a product which you can see right here was better than anything they had. It's not our fault they mixed it with dirty water. And so what I'm saying about that is, as you see what the quote progress is that people are buying into in Africa, because I want your leisure. I want your big fancy houses and your wonderful trinkets and your great foods. We want all of those things. We see them too, and that's what you sell them. But what are you really selling them at the end of the day? And so you're going to see folks give up things for that dream, if you will. So that's the carrot that's being put out there. And when you have people who live simply, people who live in harmony with everything around them, and then you say to them, but look at what we have over here. You could have all of that with no intention of that ever happening. Because if you look at it, just numbers, raw numbers here. If the rest of the world lived like America lived, every natural resource in the world would be gone within a day. So that's not even possible. Right. See? So again, so the future is I think the future in general is rather dark, very dim, and very clouded and complicated, and quite possibly catastrophically destined for upheaval that we've never seen. But I think the distant future is very bright, because we just got to figure this out. And like I said, I'd love for us to figure it out the easy way, but it doesn't look like that's going to happen. And Africa will struggle and suffer tremendously, I believe, tremendously, before we see that light at the end of the tunnel.
Finally, I wanted to speak about our young people. What do you see? Is there any hope? I mean, pants below their butt. I mean, a cultural. I have a videotape. I'm going to show it to you. They are now making videotapes of street fights, real street fights. There's so many of them that these fights that have been caught by people and caught on cameras and everything are now being compiled and sold. I was in the flea market Saturday, and I was astounded because there were large crowds looking and laughing and, oh, did you see that? Wow! And these fights are devastating, some of them. And it can only reproduce
the same.
Sure. Because when you watch that, I bought him so I could take it to my son to show him that he has to get his son into karate. I really feel that way, because when you look at what's happening, if he can't protect himself, and all you got to do is, in some of these neighborhoods, is be at the wrong place at the right time.
That's it.
And if you can't handle the territory,
yeah, I know.
Dead.
Oh, I know. So my son and I are having that conversation as well.
Yeah. What's triggering it?
What's triggering it is the same. It's the same things. It's the haves and the have-nots. And the have-nots are saying, if I can't have it, you can't either. It's that remember I told you the death of culture is tantamount to the death of the self. You know, there's a statement that says, in my book, Post-Traumatic Slave Syndrome, it says, if I am a molehill, then by God there shall be no mountains. And you have people that, and our young people, who are, they're drunk with the desire for gratification, instant gratification, drunk with it.
Why?
Because I think everything in their environment, the stimulus of video games, everything is heightened. I want it now. I want more of it. I want it instantly. And when you don't have it, when you are someone who doesn't have access to these material things, then when you get them, you use them all. You get it all. You see, it's an intensity to gratify it immediately, because I won't have that tomorrow. So I need to get it right now. I really would love to have one of those. And he just walked in the store and he left that on the front seat of his car. Got to get it now. Now, that brother said that to me. He disrespected me, and I'm gonna lose respect everywhere if I don't get him straight now. It's instant gratification. It's that hunger, the thirst, the insatiable desire for material things, and the haves and the have-nots. Deciding, I don't have anything. My back's against the wall. Where am I going? What am I doing? When I have been taught by everything in my environment, I've been socialized, absent of my culture, I've been socialized that I am what I have. And if I am what I have, right, and if I don't have anything, then I got to find another way to arrive at a sense of respect, manhood, dignity. So I could beat him up. I'm bigger, badder, tougher, stronger than him or her. Females just as much. The violence among females, people aren't watching it as closely, but it is even perhaps more devastating than what we see with men. What's happening with young girls. I mean, we're talking about stabbings. You know, it's one thing to drive by and shoot someone, and while it's a horrific thing and it's violent, it takes a whole lot to walk up on someone and thrust a knife inside of them. And that's what girls are doing. So yeah, it's deep. You know, I hate to present such a bleak picture. I'm not one of those people that do not have hope. You know, there's that story. I always talk about that story. The guy with the starfish. He's walking along the beach. You know, the one where the guy's walking along the beach and thousands of starfish, and he keeps whipping them back. And the guy goes, "What are you doing that for? It's ridiculous. You look at all these starfish. What possible impact can you have?" He said, "It meant something to that one." That threw back. You know, and so for me, you never know which one of those minds is a Malcolm that you save. Which one of those minds are W.E.B. or, you know, Ida B. Wells that you save. You never know, and what they will be able to do. So I never give up hope, because I think one sincere, enlightened soul can change a continent. We've seen it happen. We've seen Mahatma Gandhi. You know, we've seen the Nelson Mandelas. We've seen what one individual can do. Well, maybe what will happen if we find two, you know, or three or four or five? I'll never give up, because I know that, you know, that's the interesting thing about physics. You know, that you can apply a certain amount of force at the right time and have incredible results, even though the thing itself is very small.
Yeah, that's true.
You see? So I hold to that. And in that moment, so much can change in that individual, or in that behavior, in that, you know. So that enlightened thought, much can come from it. You know, change can happen. So I you know, we've always had these times, the rise and the fall of civilizations.
Yes.
It is unimaginable for us as Americans to believe that this is a civilization that can fall. And there's never been a time in history when civilizations did not fall. But we become ethnocentric and egocentric and arrogant, prideful, and vain. And we believe it simply can never happen here. Even those on the great Titanic, when it was in the water going down, didn't believe it could sink. And yet we have had civilizations come and go, and they will continue to. I'm hoping that I will not live to see that part, that disintegration.
Well, I want to thank you, but if we have another minute, I'll ask you my pet question. Things have changed so much between brothers and sisters, men and women, since I grew up.
Oh boy.
Music has really changed. We sung love songs. I mean, we really, and we danced together. When we danced, we held you and romanced you. But there seems to be a disconnect between black women and black men.
Yeah, there's a true disconnect. I think it's, and I don't think it's just with black men and black women, but it certainly is pronounced. But I think it goes back to your original question, when you're disconnected from yourself. You can't be with anybody else. You can't be with yourself. You see, if you don't have a strong sense of you, a healthy you can't not be healthy with someone else. Right? You get two half-healthy people, well, you have a half-healthy relationship, right? And what's happening now is people aren't doing, all of us are searching for that feeling of love and connectedness and intimacy that we want to have. But we're filling it with things that can't lead us there. And we're arriving in those situations, myself included, without the proper tools to navigate it, having not done the proper healing of oneself. And with black men and black women, it's even more complex, given post-traumatic, given the history, given the trauma, given the oppression. And then I'm trying to deal with your injury as a man, and this man is trying to deal with my injury as a woman. And then we're trying to base that on a European standard that no one can live up to. That Europeans don't even try to live up to, that we've bought into. We bought into believing, okay, this is what a man should do, this is what a woman should do, and it's not working out that way. And so now we're crying foul because you're not representing, once again, what the media says you're supposed to be. And then you have enough of that out there, enough of the noise out there, and then we begin to believe the hype that black women feel like this about black men and black men feel like this about black women, and we certainly haven't done any empirical data research to determine that, and yet the media has also spurned this kind of contempt for one another that I don't believe is there, not on a level that they're saying. And you look at any community, well, not any community, but you look at most of Americans, and you're looking at a divorce rate that's horrific. We aren't getting this one right. Some people are getting it right. My sense is, let's figure out what is sustaining that and what's making them whole. Now, at the same time, you got to remember, as we're trying to collect ourselves, look at this mountain of stuff we're trying to do. We're trying to recapture the kids that they're taking video shots that are fighting. We're trying to reclaim our sense of culture. We're trying to figure out how we can stabilize ourselves economically. We're trying to figure out how to attach ourselves to the historical generational crap that's been passed along to us. We're trying to extricate ourselves from some of the crazy stuff Big Mama told us and Big Daddy told us and all of that. And, well, there's crack and alcoholism. And then we wonder why we can't be together in the same room. Why we can't love each other. We don't love ourselves. And we don't love ourselves because we don't know who we are.
That's the key.
It's the cycle.
Doctor, I want to thank you so very much.
You're so welcome. So welcome. I rarely have opportunities to pray with groups because the majority of the time I'm teaching and training folks who don't want to hear what I have to say. Okay. So I'd like to start with a prayer. And the reason why it's important to me, I try to protect myself when I say prayer. And the prayer is to protect me from myself. Because self and ego is the greatest villain we have. And I need to pray to get myself removed so that I can be an open channel and the right stuff come out. Oh God, refresh and gladden my spirit, purify my heart, illumine my powers. I lay all my affairs in thy hand. Thou art my guide and my refuge. I will no longer be sorrowful and grieved. I will be a happy and joyful being. Oh God, I will no longer be full of anxiety, nor will I let trouble harass me. I will not dwell on the unpleasant things of life. Oh God, thou art more friend to me than I am to myself. I dedicate myself to thee, O Lord. Amen. Okay. How many of you are familiar with the work of Dr. Edwin Nichols? Okay, this is wonderful. I start off by talking about the work of Dr. Edwin Nichols because Dr. Nichols is the reason why I'm here, for one thing. He just said, yeah, you go. That's where you need to go. Go do this. And he had a great deal of faith in me, and I, of course, was inspired by him, and much of my work has been a direct result of him being the catalyst for that. The work that I've done has largely had to do with education. My background is solidly mental health. I've worked as a professional social worker for 18 years. I have a degree in social work and also a clinical master's in psychology. That's not important, actually. I say that because it gave me the entree to working with a variety of people, very diverse groups of people, from severely emotionally disturbed, chronically mentally ill, adolescent and adult male and female prostitutes, educably retarded, everybody, criminals, you name it, everybody I worked with. And it really helps you understand that indeed humanity is one. You know, we are one soul in many bodies. Work. This was very intensive work, and it's very close to my heart. This is the fourth time I think I've done this since I've been on this trip, and it has its own life. Post-traumatic slave syndrome came to me at 2 a.m. one morning. That's how it came. I woke up, it woke me up, and the words were there. I wrote them down and hadn't a clue as to what they meant. Had no idea what they meant. But I knew that it was important, and I knew it was real, and that's where my journey began. If you're familiar with Dr. Nichols, you know that the axiology for the African and the Latino is man or member to man. The highest value lies in the relationship between people. The highest value lies in the relationship between people. It is the highest standard of reality for this particular group. And thus, the notion of slavery had a profound impact upon this group. Because what slavery did was categorically, completely destroy relationships. That's what its intent was. That was the purpose of it. So we understand that of any group, you have the man object, highest value lies in the object. You have the man group, highest value lies in the group. To destroy the relationship, which is central to your survival, was the worst possible atrocity to happen to these folks. Okay, so that became clear just from a very logical vantage point. But what we never understood is how systematic and what it was that was the result of that. One of the things we can say about African American people, that this work is happening, it's unearthing itself. You guys have a cemetery, and the folks are unearthing and saying, we will be heard. It's something that has to be said. But what was done? What do we have right now in 1998? Well, the first thing we have to do is to begin to understand the perspective, how we actually got here, who said that this thing was okay to do, and why was it okay to do?
And the first thing we have to understand is that in order for one group of people to oppress on the level that they oppress African Americans and then go to church. Because see, you were able to do all that and then you had to go to church, right? So the same man that beat people and raped them and had his way with the women would go to church. And the only way you could do that is to make people understand that they weren't like me. This is someone that is not human, that's less than me. So I started doing a great deal of research into slave culture, into the whole notion of how that happened. Now this book is called Southern Slavery and the Law. I want you to see how thick it is. See how thick that book is? That's how many laws were created to support that system, because it is an insane system, you see. We have to understand it. So we got to figure out, how can we make this so? How can we justify it? And early on, this is what was said. This was the scientific understanding of who these people were. This inquiry into the physical, mental, and moral development of the Negro race seems to point them clearly and peculiarly fitted for a laborious class. Their physical frame is capable of great and long-continued exertion. Their mental capacity renders them incapable of successful self-development and yet adapts them for the direction of a wiser race. Their moral character renders them happy, peaceful, contented, and cheerful in a status that would break the spirit and destroy the energies of a Caucasian. So I have to make myself believe that these folks are, they're fitted for this, first of all. There's a thing that says that a Negro is prima facie by nature a slave. There's a statement that says that he must be by nature, if black, then slave. Because I have to make you less than me. So now let's try to understand how we begin to deal with the notion of this slavery. I'm going to give you some ideas about how complicated this process began, how it became a very difficult system to maintain. First of all, let's ask this question. Can a slave sell itself into slavery? Now you got to ask yourself, why would a slave want to sell himself back into slavery? Well, there's a lot of reasons why you might. Because say, for example, when you was freed from slavery, you were 9 years old. Your mama and daddy were killed. You're an orphan, but you're free. No, you're going to sell yourself back into slavery because you can't exist without it, right? So that had to go to court. Can a slave sell himself? Well, then we have to ask the question, does a man have a right unto himself? Well, yes, a man does, but is a slave a man? Well, no, then they can't do that. Okay. Then you have to ask the question, it's all in the book, can a slave that's free buy a slave? So then you have to ask yourself, why would a slave want to buy a man that's free? Because I want to buy my family back. Okay? I'm going to buy all my aunts and uncles and cousins and brothers and sisters now that I'm free. But they said, now wait a minute, if a black person is prima facie naturally a slave, you're naturally a slave, how can you then presume that you can own a slave? So, no, I'm sorry, you can't do that. I mean, it was incredible how much went into this whole notion, because we have to figure out what are we going to do with these people. So then came the question, how did they get us to do it? Was it systematic? This was written in How to Make a Slave. Let's Make a Slave. This was, a matter of fact, Farrakhan read from this. This was from his speech. The breaking process of the African woman. This was written in, like you put together the kind of study guide to make a slave. This is a study guide. Then take the female, run a series of tests on her to see if she will submit to your desires willingly. Test her in every way because she is the most important factor for good economics. If she shows any sign of resistance in submitting entirely and completely to your will, do not hesitate to use the bullwhip on her to extract that last bit of bitch out of her. But take care not to kill her, for in doing so, you spoil good economics. When in complete submission, she will train her offspring in the early years to submit to labor when they become of age. It was systematic. And let's talk about that, because I'm a mother. Now, if I'm a good mother, I'm going to prepare my children for whatever it is they have to endure, right? Like you prepare your children and get them ready for school and education. You get them ready for work, the world of work. You get them ready for their manhood and rites of passage, all those things. Then if my daughter, and I'm in a slave situation, I need to prepare her to be raped, don't I? I got to prepare my daughter who's 11 years old, because surely she will be raped. And I got to tell her, baby, this is how you got to do it. Don't scream. Don't fight back when he does this, when he does that, because I'm a good mother, aren't I? Because I'm going to prepare my daughter. I'm not going to let her walk into that blind. I'm going to prepare her. But what am I preparing her for? I'm preparing my daughter for pathology. I'm preparing her for a sick thing. But I'm a good mother, and I got to do that. And now we have to understand the nature of what that does to someone. What does that do to the mother? What does that do to the father who has been forever made an adolescent? Because you see, you're never going to be a man, because you're always going to belong to the master. So you never, ever, and thus you have the notion of boy, because you really have no adult role. No one ever understood that as it related to that relationship of family. I lost my role because I became eternally a boy. So one of the things that we began to look at is no one has ever measured that, you see. No one's ever measured that level of those stressors. So that's where my interest began. I started to look at that, and then you go to see Homicidal, And then white people who never knew. When I came out the show, I saw Homicidal in 3 different states, and I brought people. And I just really went for the purposes of observing the audience. I wanted to see the response to the movie. Every single time, I was in Florida once, I was in Portland, I was all over the place, saw Homicidal, just to see what people's response was. And it was very similar to that of Schindler's List. People were just silent. Nothing. Nobody said a word. Movie was over, credits were rolling. White people were sobbing in their seats, So I go to the ladies' room. I'm in the ladies' room. Everybody's, in line. Nobody's saying a word. White people are very uncomfortable. My goodness, I didn't know. How come we didn't know anything about that? I had no idea that happened. And I just, it's amazing, why? Why? And I said, because I'm in the bathroom, I can't help myself. I said, well, if you understand why you didn't know, because see, if that had been a white man, like they said in the movie, he would be so heavily robed with jewels and, he'd have a day, of recognition. I said he would be a hero, but it was a black man, you see. That's why it was so. And she says, but, well, in the final analysis, it was amazing. And the final, they did at least, And so everybody in the bathroom turned around and looked at her. Right? It's like, don't you even go there. Don't you even try, And then the woman sees a friend of hers in the line, and she goes, gosh, did you know anything about this kind of thing? Dorothy, or whatever your name is. And the woman goes, my son's name is Sin-K. And she just looked at her. Did I know my son's name is Sin-K? I said to her, you don't know for the same reason all of America doesn't know. This is something we don't want to believe. Let me explain how I understand the pathology around this with white America. See, white America, and America in general, has a collective pathology. Here's the first thing. I went to South Africa. 1994, I went to South Africa. Myself and 8 other African-American women went to South Africa. And it was right on the heels of the inauguration. I'm in Johannesburg. And I got to tell you, I told the folks, I really prepared to go. I got an attitude. How you prepare yourself? It's like when you've had an argument with somebody, you know, and then the next day you go see them, right? They done you wrong, and you getting ready to see them the next day. So what you do is you think to yourself, well, you know, if they say this is what I'm going to say. Okay, you know, yeah, you know, if they go there, then, you know. So you rehearse the whole thing. It never works, right? When you get there, you're all prepared, and the person says, gosh, you know, I really apologize for last night. I don't know what happened. And you're sitting there like, you know, it doesn't go nowhere. So I'm in South Africa because I'm prepared for people to act out, you know. I'm black. Yeah, I'm black. You know, I'm ready to, you know. So I'm walking around about 2-3 weeks. You know, nothing's happening. You know, so I start provoking folks. Because you're not going to go and have a whole trip in South Africa and not have an experience. Okay, I'm going to come back with some kind of experience. So I start asking the white South Africans, I said, you know, tell me something. What was it like, that apartheid? You know, that must have been something. They go, yeah, Joy, you know, it was a horrible thing, the behavior of the whites, the oppression of the blacks. We're glad it's over. Welcome to the new South Africa. So about a half dozen people do that to me. I said, I know, okay, I'm going to ask the black South Africans, right? So I go to the black South Africans and say, you know, come on, talk to me. It must have been, you know, that apartheid. Tell me a little bit about that. What, you know, what was that like? Joy, you know, it was a horrible thing. The oppression of the blacks, the behavior of the whites. We're glad it's over. Welcome to the new South Africa. And I'm thinking, isn't anybody just a little bit upset? You know, we got our folks in Idaho that's behaving bad, and the whole crew. Come on now, they got to be there, and I'm sure they were. But I was 6.5 weeks in Southern Africa, and I didn't experience the level of oppression and racism that I experienced in the Portland airport. It did not happen to me. So I stopped and I thought to myself, I said, what is going on here? I began to assess the situation. The situation was like this. You see, South Africa owned it. They owned it to the entire world. They got up, said, yep, we did it. Butts showing. Everybody knows it. Please come back and bring your money. Okay. South Africa knew that they did it. America's pathology is her denial. It is what keeps us sick. I have a true value that I carry with me everywhere I go. I carry it with me in treatment when I'm dealing with folks one-on-one in terms of therapy. I carry it with me as it relates to my children in every activity of my life. Truthfulness is the foundation of all human virtues. And without truthfulness, you cannot attain to any other virtue. So I don't care what you do, or who you are, how much you make, or how much people like you. If you're lying, you're not going to be a healthy person. Simple as that. Now, we should have known that a long time ago because we've been told that. But I understand it on a lot of different levels. It is our denial that makes us sick. It is the secrets that make us sick. And so I understand that so clearly that in everything I do, I insist upon the truth. So I tell folks, I'm going to tell you the truth. Now, if I'm wrong, I'm going to own it. If you bring me something that says, Joy, you know, wasn't quite right on that. That was 1832. I'm going to say, okay, let me mark it in. I don't have a problem with people not, you know, with being wrong. But my intent and what's in my heart is to tell the truth. I'm going to always try to tell the truth. And so the key here is to recognize that in everything, including on a global scale to a very micro scale, we've got to tell the truth. And there is fear associated with that. And the fear associated with that represents itself in a lot of different ways. One is, what white people do, a lot of folks, you know, because I work in a world where I go into corporate America, you know, I trained 750 police officers, for example, in Oregon. And I realized after that there was no one I couldn't train. Okay? After all, these folks had guns. Okay? And so I realized that, you know, in training all these different folks, that there's a pathology around the denial. And the denial represents itself in a lot of ways. One is someone will tell you, I don't care what color you are. I don't care about color. Oh, you could be purple, green, or blue. Well, guess what? No one is. Have you noticed that whenever you hear people say that, these people are so much in denial, they can't even use real colors. They never do, and it's a perfect indication. I've even said that in a workshop and had someone, because it's so knee-jerk, say it. You know what? I don't care if you're blue-green, and everybody in the room kind of looks at them like, denial. You know, it becomes real clear. I also recognize this when I go in, because I know I'm going into a war. First of all, last thing these police officers wanted to see was a woman telling them anything. Least of all, a black woman, and worse still a young black woman, right? And it was mandatory training, and I'm aware of this. But, I know how to deal with pathology. I'm a therapist, so I know how to deal with sick people. So when they went off with me, I got with them. I went therapeutic on them, so I understood that. When they were losing, I said, I know I'm dealing with some folks that ain't right here. So when I was working with that group, though, I really started to understand a little bit more about the pathology around denial. Another thing that folks will say is, I don't even notice. These are folks that are beyond you and I, by the way. I don't notice race. Gosh, I don't even notice it. I think that's interesting. So in other words, what you're saying to me is you prefer to erase me than to see me. I'm African American, I'm okay with that, and I insist upon you acknowledging that and not erasing me. No, you do notice. That's not true. You do notice. And the fact of the matter is, the thing I love, there's two groups of people that always tell the truth. Old people, because they don't care what you think. I remember a real dear friend of mine, his name is Mr. Golar. Mr. Golar, he died not too long ago, and he was in his late 70s. He would stand up and give you the truth. And when Mr. Golar would say something, it didn't matter. Everybody shut up and listened to him, right? Because he was old, and you listened to Mr. Golar. Mr. Golar said, I want to tell you something, and I need to tell all you women out here something. Men is stupid. That was it. The answer to whatever you got to say about is men is stupid, right? So I said, okay. When it gets deep in the marriage, I tell my husband, now you know what Mr. Golar said. You know what he said, And when you see that kind of notion of truth, the other group that tells you are children. You got a booger in your nose. They tell you, don't they? They tell you the truth. And so children tell the truth, and they do notice. And they point at folks that look different. And they tell you how they look different, So I know that that's not true. So there's another representation of the denial. It reflects itself that way. Then there's some other behaviors. If you're at work, this is wonderful. People go to work, and people want to be politically correct. So it's politically correct to do diversity type stuff. So this is what I call the fruit and festival approach to dealing with race. I know. Let's have a potluck. Let's do, it's Black History Month. Let's do a potluck. Let's do a diversity thing. Don't get Lorraine in accounting. Isn't she like Mexican or something? Yeah, good. Get her. And I think there's an Asian guy. Get him. Let's do a little committee. Have them all come together. We'll do a little thing. Everybody brings ethnic food. And then maybe we can throw in a little ethnic garb, right? And then we'll make a little ethnic music there. And then we'll just celebrate diversity, right? Now, what you just said is all we really brought was our food, our garb, and our music, which trivializes culture, doesn't it? It just totally trivializes it. Because, again, there's a denial of any relevance, that we had any major contribution to the world. Any of those groups, right? And then there's what I call the parsley on the plate approach, right? This is when they'll have a conference or something, they go, let's do a kind of a cultural piece. Throw it in at the end, give an hour to some little thing at the end. Let's just add it on, kind of thing, as an additional. It's not the main meat. It's just that little piece you add. And if you think of it in the context of when you go to restaurants, and you guys got serious restaurants here, boy, I'm telling you. We don't know how to eat anywhere else in the world. But in New York, y'all know how to eat. You go to a restaurant, doesn't matter which restaurant you go to. Doesn't matter. If it's a good restaurant, you can order eggs. You notice how they put that little parsley on there? Come on now, you feel good about that parsley. It make you kind of raise up a little bit when that, because you're not in your own kitchen. Because you got that little, it gives you, but you ain't eating that parsley. You gonna scrape that on off the plate, move it on out the way. You have no intention of eating that parsley. But you want it there. Matter of fact, if they brought that little plate blank, you'd be upset. You go, where's my parsley? Just so you could throw it away. And that's the other way they treat it. It's a non-essential, you see. It's something that simply adds color. Y'all can be here, but, you don't really have any content. So when we begin to look at those kind of behaviors, I began to watch a pathology in America around this. So we're real sick with this issue. So now we have to ask ourselves, what was the perspective of whites about this thing of freeing the slaves? Because I'm going to get into what we had to deal with. But what was the issue around freeing these slaves? Let's see what old Thomas Jefferson had to say. Thomas Jefferson, who was a slaveholder throughout his entire adult life, had serious misgivings about ever incorporating freed blacks into the Union. He did not believe that a multiracial society was possible. His solution was to emancipate blacks, colonize them somewhere, and replace them with white immigrants. He theorized that violence was an inevitable outcome of slavery. Now understand that my dissertation topic, which is post-traumatic slave syndrome, focuses specifically on African American male violence. That's what I'm looking at. And he quotes, "It will probably be asked, why not retain and incorporate the blacks into the state and thus save the expense of supplying by importation of white settlers the vacancies they will leave? Deep-rooted prejudices entertained by the whites, 10,000 recollections by the blacks of the injuries they have sustained, new provocations, the real distinctions which nature has made, and many other circumstances will divide us into parties and produce convulsions which probably will never end but in the extermination of one or the other race. To these objections, which are political, may be added others, which are physical and moral." That was his belief. Because you see, what he assumed was that our axiology was like his, and that we would do to them what they did to us. And I'm going to tell you something, one of the biggest fears and the most important clean sweeping event that has happened was the Million Man March. Because what the Million Man March did, now let me talk to you, it removed the myth in an instant of who we thought we were, as well as white people. Because you see, we didn't know we could do that either, because they had fully convinced us that three of us could not gather without someone dying. So what suddenly happened is everybody in the nation that was black was praying. Everybody I know was praying. And when they looked up, they went, "Oh my God, 1 million black men?" And here's what happened in white people's psyche. You see, we had convinced them they couldn't come together. We had told them we had taught them to hate one another. We did all that, and oh my God, 1 million of them came together without incident. Well, if they could come together in peace, talk to me. Talk to me, and look who was leading them there. If they could convince one another they could come together in love, then what if they could come together and say, we through with this? That was the fear. So they had to get the little Clarence Thomas types to get up and go, "Oh no, it wasn't all that. It was a farce and nothing happened." That's what they did. They got the blacks, the overseers. They got the overseers and the gatekeepers in there to try to tell everybody to, don't worry about the Negroes. They still don't, and convince all the Negroes that didn't happen. And these are the things that began to, again, awaken a people frightened by the prospect of us coming together. So I looked at all that. I started gathering the data, because I got to count and measure everything. I got to be able to measure it. That's the first thing. It ain't real unless you can measure it, right? But there's something that I know. As a matter of fact, my dissertation committee, they're wonderful people. They got my back. But, they're linear. And they're gonna say, "Well, Joy, we got to be able to measure this thing." I said, then there's something I insist that you put into that measurement. Because, there's linear and sequential thought, and there's the whole measurement process and scientific inquiry and all that. I said, but you need to enter this into my data as an accurate and viable measurement. There's a quotation in Scripture that says that the black man is like the pupil of the eye, surrounded by a sea of white, but is the pupil which contains the sight that beholds what is before it. We are a people of vision. That's a spiritual truth. My Lord gave me that. And I insist that you use it as a criteria of measurement because it is real. And you don't have it. And just because you don't have it does not mean it does not exist. And so they're sitting there going, I don't care if you can measure it. You probably don't have an instrument to measure it. But everybody in this room knows it's real because we had to learn how to read people, did we not? We could walk in the room, and I don't know, because nobody sat down and gave us lessons. But we know how to read them. We go, okay, that man over there is mad at that woman. You see? We in the room, we ain't ever moved. We just kind of looked up. We checked it out. Said, "Oh wow, now that's the woman he's been with." And you could tell that's it's getting ready to be on. Let me get on up. You know, we figured it out. We done figured it all out. You got white people in the same room going, "Did someone come in?" They don't even know. Nothing going on. Now see, now that is an ability which you and I, we have taken it totally for granted. Do you know that the ability to read people? Do you know that is way off the charts in terms of an ability? And we as children learn that. I don't know where it came from. I don't know if it is inherent that God gave this particular race that ability. My belief is that's where it is. We were born with this. It's an innate ability we have to read you. And that's why they have problems with our children, because our children read them. They read the teachers. They can read their insincerity. They can read their fear. They can read it. And because they can read it, they won't buy it. And that's why I always tell people, don't go in the community and don't come real. I said, there's something called heart. You know, it's interesting, our language. Well, the brother got heart. Yeah, but he had a heart. And white people going, have a heart? What's that mean? You know, because we know he had it here. We could feel it. We could see it. And when they don't have hearts, he ain't no heart. That was his problem. He couldn't stay on the team. He had no heart. You know, he couldn't be in that job because he didn't have no heart. So we understand those whole other language around vision that they don't see. See, so I insisted that be a part of our measurement. And that's okay. Wrote it on there and they said, I agree with you. They wrote it in the thing because I said, I know we can see it. So now I'm beginning to look at the resilience, the strength of our people. Now let me show you another one. When he said that we were fit for a laborious class, you know, that's what they said. They're fit for this. Look at their frames. They can endure. When the slave cemetery unearthed itself, they didn't even want them to go in and look at it. Please don't look at it. It's not, no. They found an inordinate amount of infants. So we know the infant mortality rate was very high, which it still is. We knew that the injuries that were sustained during that time, I'll give you an example. They would show the frame of an African-American man, large, strong man. And they was finding injuries that literally do not exist in this time, in contemporary times. They've never seen it. And it is an injury where they show that the muscle completely detaches itself from the bone because of exertion. And the truth of the matter is no human being would ever work that hard to the extent that the muscle will detach itself. But if someone's holding a shotgun over you, you got to do it. So what we tell our children is, look how resilient we are as a people. That's an example of strength. So the issue here in terms of post-traumatic slave syndrome, there's a lot of issues because you see, I want you to understand that white people will try to use this against us. I know that. That was the dilemma I have struggled with. But I also know that the truth is the only thing that's going to get us healed. So we got to tell the truth. I can't concern myself with that risk. So I look at the notion of what it is that we're seeing with African American people. We're seeing both a very fragile people and a very, very strong people, a very resilient culture and a very injured culture. That's what I see. And I saw it in the children because that's where my focus was, always on the children, because they are the generation. They are the future. And so I understand when I begin to look at them, some behaviors. So now we get very directly into what is post-traumatic slave syndrome. How many of you are familiar with post-traumatic stress disorder? Okay. That's a disorder that came about as a result of some of the work into stuff like, it started off with a German man who started looking at shell shock. These were victims or veterans, war veterans, who would have these kind of behaviors after having been involved in war, right? So they started to look at the behaviors and look at some of the symptomology around that. And the symptoms had to do with certain kinds of injuries or certain kinds of traumas that people experience. Now let me tell you who has been identified. There's a book called the DSM-4, Diagnostic Statistical Manual for Mental Disorders, 4th edition, right? And what this book is, essentially, is a very easy way of getting money. It's getting third-party billing, getting folks, because you got to tell the people, the insurance folks, that they got this illness and they'll pay this much for it. Okay, that's all it's about. Diagnosing, right? So they decided who has it. Well, here's the people who have it that's listed. Victims of rape, war veterans, victims of incest, heart attack victims, victims of natural disasters, victims of severe accidents. Now, what I want you to do is I want you to consider slaves. So all I want, because they aren't on the list, by the way. They didn't put the slaves on the list. I thought that was odd. Okay. Now I'm gonna put a mark down for every one of these particular symptoms or these particular predictors that actually create this illness. Reaction to a distressing event which may have occurred months or years before. Well, we know that. The most common trauma involved a serious threat or harm to one's life or physical integrity. Got that one? Okay. A threat to one's children, spouse, or close relatives. Sudden destruction of one's home or community. Seeing another person injured or killed as a result of accident or physical violence. Okay. Let's see. Learning about a serious threat to a close friend, a relative, in other words, someone kidnapped, tortured, or killed. Okay. Stressor is experienced with intense fear, terror, and helplessness. Disorder is considered to be more severe and will last longer when the stressor is of human design. Talk to them. They got all of them. They had all of them. So we know that you can experience, let me explain what I mean by trauma. If I shoot this man, if he lives, he's traumatized, right? We know that. If this man saw me shooting, he's traumatized. If someone standing outside heard the shot, they're traumatized. And if someone that wasn't there heard about someone being shot, they can be traumatized. Okay, so all of those are levels, differential levels of the trauma, right? You don't have to be there directly. For example, when we had the guy Dahmer, the guy that was mutilating people, the family members of the people who were mutilated are in therapy for post-traumatic stress disorder at the thought of what he did to someone they loved. You see, that's the differential. Now, some people who have stressors become stronger. You know what I'm saying? There are certain people who endure and move on. Then there are those who actually absorb all of that and begin to exhibit pathologies as a result of that trauma. So there are all of these things which make it very, very, very difficult to measure. But indeed, it did exist and it did happen. But what we have to ask ourselves now are what are some of the symptoms of this? Now listen to this. Feeling of detachment or estrangement from others. Restricted range of affection. Unable to love, have loving relationships. Sense of foreshortened future. Child does not expect to have a career, marriage, or children, or a long life. Irritability or outbursts of anger. Unpredictable explosions of aggressive behavior. Hypervigilance. Exaggerated startle response. Okay, now these are the symptoms of post-traumatic stress disorder. So now we know the slaves had all the traumas. We know they had them for close to 300 years. So we're going, do we know that they had post-traumatic stress disorder? Okay, they had it. Now here's a question. After slavery ended, did they do that group therapy thing? They said, okay, now all y'all free. Just sign up for the clinic. We're going to help you heal now. Did that happen? Of course it didn't happen. So now we have to ask ourselves, and the people go, well, you know, this is interesting, because white people always say, you know, that was so long ago. I wasn't there. I didn't enslave anybody. I always say that. I just don't understand why why can't we just forget about it? I wasn't there, I didn't do it. I go, you know what? I wasn't there either. And I didn't do it. But today, I suffer and you still benefit. So it is with us. So do not try to trivialize this and make it irrelevant because you wasn't there. So now we got to ask ourselves, so what did happen? Because you see, now I got a mama and a daddy with feelings of estrangement, outbursts of anger, violent behavior, sense of foreshortened future. All that's happening, but I got to raise a child. So Johnny gets raised with a mama and a daddy like that. So now, does that injure Johnny? Of course it does. Now here's a second question. Does Johnny himself, because you know we've been freed, have any traumas of his own? Does he experience, slavery's over now. Did the traumas continue? You bet they did. Matter of fact, they continued it to such a degree that there were over 4,128 lynchings after slavery was officially over. Those were the documented lynchings that occurred, right? And then you go, well, after that, well, didn't things get a little better? Well, you guys remember we had Jim Crow laws, right? Did the violence happen? Because they go, wasn't we all one happy family? Well, we're singing together and all that. From the moment that the issue began to arise about the issues of segregation, we had, let's see now, 1963, Virgil Lamar Ware, youth killed during a wave of racist violence in Birmingham. It goes on to Emmett Till, Clarence Triggs, O'Neal Moore, all these folks that were killed. Right, you go, and that was in the 60s, and that goes all the way full through to, of course, the assassination of Martin Luther King. And then you say, but did the traumas continue? Did it have to continue? You guys remember the brother that got beaten to death? I know because I live in Portland, Oregon. His name was Mulugeta Sarah, Ethiopian man just going home from work, beaten to death by skinheads, 1989. Talk to me now. Did the trauma stop? Oh, no, it didn't stop. Because y'all guys remember, when they took Rodney King and beat him and then told you didn't see it, right? And then we also remember that very recently a brother has been beheaded and burned. Did the trauma continue? Of course it did. Now, where was the treatment? Talk to me. When did they say, okay, now we realize we forgot. Let's start doing some lineup. 3. No, we didn't get it, did we? No, we didn't. And not only did we live with all of the residual results of that illness, but we had additional trauma. And then we were told, but we're all equal. See, we're all at the same place. And then they do something like, matter of fact, let's start eliminating a few things, because you have to understand that we're living in a man-object-oriented system. It ain't even about you. It's about the object. So then remember when they removed affirmative action? In UC schools, all UC campuses, no more affirmative action. Because it's unfair. All of those Negroes are getting in those places rightfully deserved by white people. Even black people started feeling guilty. Did you know we start feeling guilty when white people get upset? We start going and trying to fix them, please like us. We do that because that's part of the pathology. Okay, now, let's look at the pie. Here's the pie. Okay. 8% of the folks getting in were Hispanic. 8% of Hispanics got in through affirmative action. Something like 4 to actually 6% of African Americans got in through affirmative action. Look at all that space we taking up. Look at all those people getting in through affirmative action. That's the truth. That's what the pie looks like. So now we have to ask ourselves, how come those people just can't get in like all the rest of them? Well, haven't you seen the bell curve? It says they're genetically inferior. That's why they can't do it. That explains it. Well, let's look at the pie and figure out who else is getting in. Now, we know those are Europeans. Who are them folks? Those are Asians. That's right. Now, how come all those Asians are getting in? 1995, first time in the history of UC Berkeley, the incoming freshman class had more Asians than Europeans. UC Berkeley, the home of Shockley and them, the bell curve people. Well, now, how come they're getting in? Well, they're actually scoring better on the entrance exam. Well, that must mean that they're smarter. Nah, they just study more. That's what white people said. That's how come they get in. They study more. Well, actually, what do they do really well on? They do really well on math and that's science. Well, does that mean they're smarter? No, it must have something to do with their language. That allows them to be able to do that better. So now, 1996, they have, as Dr. Nichols would say, changed the rules. Now, in every part of, every aspect of the exam, you have a narrative and an English part, which they score lower on than anyone else. So they've added that to every aspect of the exam, which means the science and math and all of it has the English narrative, in hopes of defeating that. But what they don't understand about axiology is that they'll figure that out too. Okay, so we know that that's true. So, but that's about the object, you see. It's all about the object. That's the fear, because you have to ask yourself, why do we have to make those black people inferior? Because if we can, I want you to think it through. You think it through. Why would it be so important? Why have they gone through years to try to establish that we are genetically inferior? Because then, would they be justified in saying that person can't run a hospital? We've proven they're genetically inferior. That person can't be the head of a corporation because they're genetically inferior. That would be endangering the country. They can't run all this stuff and do all that. They can't have access to the object. Understand that that's what's triggering this thing. It's all about the object, always is. The racism has largely to do with the object and fear. It's about fear. Whenever, as a matter of fact, I have a little chart that when you see certain behaviors, and this is real important, when you see people behaving and they got to control everything and they're domineering, it means that they feel weak and helpless. That's the truth. And when a person is always negative and blaming and all of that, is deep down they feel guilt. And they're afraid. So there's certain characteristics that you see. You already know that that's what's going on. But now we got to understand that in the context of what happened to us. I also want to address the notion of biracialism, triracialism, multiracialism, and all that, because everybody in here mixed. Every person in this room is mixed. If you're African American, it means you're mixed. Now, what we have to understand about that is they had laws, once again, to deal with, how about all these babies running around, that half, with the master's children and all that. You know how they had to make us 3/5 human, a 5/5, whatever they did, we weren't all human, right? And what do you do with all these, quote, mulattoes? You know what a mulatto is. And it's interesting because a mulatto comes from the word mulus, which is where you get the word mule. And a mule, of course, is the offspring of a jackass and a horse, which means that you have a different species. So people that call him mulatto really confuse me. Call themselves mulatto. You're calling yourself a mule. But that's what they say. I am, so it must be what I am. Right? So you're looking at this whole notion, how do we square this up, and why? What happened when all of these masters, all these white men would go out to the barn with the woman and all that? What happened? Why did they have to square in court how much made a person black and how much made them white? Why did that become an issue? Only one reason: inheritance. Who's going to have the right to inheritance? They can't have the right to inheritance. It's the object. Okay? It's always about that. So now I had to start taking a look at certain behaviors of African Americans, particularly, of course, my focus is African American males. Now we know that those who have the highest homicide rate is who? African American males have the highest homicide rate. Okay? Who has the highest suicide rate? That's right. So European males have the highest suicide rate. Now I think that's interesting. That's an interesting statistic. Now let me explain to you what that means clinically. If you come into me, now first of all, tell me what depression looks like, because usually people that commit suicide are what? They depressed. They ain't happy about something. Matter of fact, they ain't happy about a lot. So they ain't happy. How does that look? How does depression look? They have the little things on television commercials that let you know what depression. What do it look like? They're sad. They're sad. They loss of appetite. Withdrawn. People start giving stuff away, right? They do all that kind of stuff. They get teary. They sleep a lot. Well, okay, you got all the symptoms. That's a depressed person. They come into therapy. You got to work with them, right? You got to try to help them. Now, it's interesting because we try to help that person because we want them to want to do what? To live. We want them to want to live. And there are all of these therapies around it. So now you got a person that's homicidal. He comes into therapy. Now, why would a person be homicidal? They look at him and they go, well, they're antisocial personalities. People have behavior, they act out, they're compulsive behavior, they're eventually labeled a sociopath. Guess what? You can't cure a sociopath. It's incurable. So what can you do with them? You lock them up. That's real simple. You know, the prisons is a system that's working. It's a growing, booming business, and we got the folks we need to put in there. Because they're sociopaths. You can't cure them. You can't fix them, so you just put them in institutions. And the moment they go into therapy, they get with the white therapist, they go, he's a homicide. Okay, gotta go. Straight to the institution. Whereas other youth who have the other behaviors, they don't have to go to institutions. They first go to treatment facilities where everybody try to help them. But the black one with the same symptomology goes to a corrective institution. Got the statistics on it. Carl Bell looked at it and said, this is what they do to these children. Okay, now, I want you to look real closely at this, and I'm going to use your example. An example that I actually used it before I even been to Brooklyn. I never was in Brooklyn. But since I've been in Brooklyn, it has a whole lot more meaning to me when I use this example. What do you call an African-American male, between 22 and 25, decides to go to a bar frequented by off-duty police officers, takes with him his gun, and starts a brawl? What do you call that? I call that suicide. That's what I call that, suicide. But it doesn't look like sad, teary, weepy, can't sleep, write the note and blow my brains out. It doesn't look like that. Because you see, we have something called invited suicide. I'm going to invite it. Because you see, I can't go out like a punk. I got to go out large. I'm going out large because I ain't going out like a punk. I ain't going to be in a back room somewhere whining and crying and pulling a trigger. I'm not going to do that. It's not culturally acceptable. But you know what? I'm depressed. It's called an active depression. Okay, it's an active depression, which means it doesn't look like the depression that's in the DSM. So now when I come in, tell me how different you're going to treat me if you think my diagnosis is depression versus sociopath. It's depression versus antisocial. That's not what you're looking at. It's not a homicidal person. It's a suicidal person. Case in point, in my community, we have what is called a Portland House of Emoji. I work with Emoji for a number of years. It's a residential program for kids who are gang involved, whatever, gang affiliated, want to be a gang, all of that, whatever it is, because I always wonder how they can even say gang affiliated, gang associated. Your brother is in a gang. Does that mean you're gang associated, gang affiliated? What does that mean? That's my brother. You know, they don't even know what. We got to put him in some kind of label. I said, well, he lives with him. What are you going to do? You think when people want to hurt him, he's going to ignore it because he doesn't want to be in the gang? You know, he's going to help his brother. So, you know, they don't know because they always got to put people in a box because you got to do what to them? Measure them. Right. So they didn't know where to put them. We call that family. I don't know. So now we have this active depression. So now we're misdiagnosing the whole thing. These two brothers that I know that run the House of Emoji, they're two identical twins. They've served time in prison. They're both in recovery. Both of their names is Johnny. They're identical twins. Both of them named Johnny. Go figure. I don't know. Daddy must have liked the name. So what happens with them is they both run that Portland House of Emoji. So they decided just so you could just differentiate. One's called Biggie. They call one Biggie. Biggie and Scotchy. That's how you do it. So now Biggie is in front of one of the local black high schools. And there's a fight that breaks out. These two young brothers are out in front of the school. One is 19, one is 16. The one that's 19 has pulled a gun on the one that's 16. You know, the crowd thins out. Johnny's there going, look, you know, he is preaching. Look, you know, brothers, we don't want to do this. We don't want to do this. This is, we can't keep killing. You know, he's going through the whole thing. They ain't even looking at him. Guy hits the gun, points it, pulls the trigger, and it jams. The gun jams, which is, in my sense, the time to run from the heavens of saying, go, run. We spared you, right? The kid stands there, throws his hands back like this, right? Just stands there. So the guy hits the gun again, pulls the trigger, and it jams the second time. Guy starts laughing, kind of chuckling. the 16-year-old is chuckling. Hits it again. This actually goes on. Third time it jams. He says, listen, brother, you think I'm afraid to die? 16 years old. He said, I'm not afraid to die, brother. I'm afraid to live, is what he said to him. He hit it the fourth time and it went off. And what I understand about that is I have to get into the psyche of a 16-year-old boy and say, why is it, how could it be that at 16 he no longer wants to live? He can't see a place in the world for himself. And I'll tell you why. Because we're a man-object-oriented system which says that you are what you are based on what you have. You are measured by your things. That's why you have brothers walking around, don't have a home, don't have a car, but got 50 gold chains. Because I got to wear some worth because I don't have any worth. So when you begin to look at those things, you say, now you're telling me I got to measure myself by the things, and then you tell me I can't have them. You bar every way that I have to get the things, and you tell me I'm nobody if I don't have it. That's what our society does to black men. And these young men don't see a way. They can't find a place to be somebody, to maintain a sense of dignity and worth. So when I look at that, I realize that that's post-traumatic slave syndrome. So what I'm saying to you is that the injury of slavery was transgenerationally transmitted, right? Because we learn it. We learn it. It's knee-jerk. We figure it out. And every generation, we give it to them. Because we pass on everything to the children, right? And the children begin to live out those things. And it's unconscious. I realize that it's unconscious. But again, when I look at the brothers, I understand there's a very, very different thing going on. One of the symptoms of post-traumatic slave syndrome. Understand that now we're not talking about post-traumatic stress disorder. Because of the protracted nature of slavery, the fact that it went on for hundreds of years suggested that the end result ain't post-traumatic stress disorder. The end result is post-traumatic slave syndrome. Socially learned, transgenerationally impacted. So now what are some of those things? Because I had to take a look at this stuff. I had to figure out what it really was, what it looked like. And we've all seen it, by the way. When I come up with these things, it's not going to be confusing. I just put a name on it. And the first place I went, believe it or not, and I always go, is to the mirror. First place I go is to the mirror, because I know Joy got it. Now let me tell you something that we go through and people don't give us. First of all, there's something called the Bec Stress Inventory. Anybody that does any kind of social work or therapy knows that there's a stressor scale. You know, if you move, it's a stressor. If you get married, it's a stressor. If you get divorced, it's a stressor. If you get death and a spouse and children, all these are stressors. They ought to put black on it. Do you understand what I'm saying? Because ain't nobody measured the stress of being black. No one understands that there is a stressor in America involved with being black. I want somebody to begin to measure what happens to the blood chemistry, heart rhythm of a brother when a police car pulls up behind him. You see, no one's measured that stressor. No one understands what that feels like. Now, I've been in a car with a brother when that happened, and I've seen his entire body change. Everything, changes. We ain't done nothing wrong. But it's automatic. Okay, I said, hey, police car behind. All of a sudden, everybody in the car. What does that mean? What is that stressor? Has anyone measured that stressor? And what happens? Let's look at the notion of anger. I like that because, people always say, people tell me, why is she so angry? I said, now, you don't know angry because I was angry years ago. I done been through it. Now, let me explain what I mean by that. There is a process. It's called the stages of negrescence, by the way. And African Americans developed this scale. The race and racial attitudes inventory, all of those things have been done. And you haven't heard about them, neither did I. When I started to do my research, I started looking for scales that measured stuff about black folks. I couldn't find them anywhere. Not in any of the refereed, journals. Nowhere. Nowhere could I find it. And all the little lists of all the little different, tools you could use wasn't there. But we did it. Years ago it was done. Years ago. But we couldn't publish in journals. Our psychiatrists, psychologists, and scientists, we couldn't publish because we was black. So we had to publish where we could in black journals and obscure articles here and there. That's how I had to find it. Matter of fact, I found the people. I found them. I found the creators of it. And they said it's been here for years. It's never been used as a tool. Because, you know, what is it, to help black people? We don't need that. But they were actually already created. And what it did was show the stages of our acculturation. In other words, there's a space that happens, something that happens to a child when they realize they're black. Do you understand what I'm saying? Because there's a time when kids are walking around, they don't know what's going on, they don't, you know, and then suddenly they get aware that they're black. I remember the impact of the Rodney King situation with my son. Now, you know, you and I, we looked at it, we're adults, we're going, God, there it is again, because it wasn't nothing new. I was like 7, 8 months pregnant. We used to get pulled over. I grew up in South Central, so that was a regular thing. We got pulled over by the police just because. They dragged my husband out the car, put a gun to his head, had the SWAT team swing around with rifles over the cars, the little megaphone saying, you know, don't move. And if he would have sneezed, here's a guy shaking like this with the gun in his hand, shaking, right? They run, they jump out, they put a poster next to his face, and they go, it's not him, roll it up, get in the car, took off. I could have had the baby right there, and my husband would have just been dead. If he would have just sneezed, it'd have been over. So when we begin to look at those behaviors of Rodney King, my son, when he saw that on television, because I saw it, and it was just a repeat of what I grew up with. But my son goes, Mommy, he got nervous. I started watching. He said, well, those are the police. Aren't those policemen? Aren't they supposed to protect us, Mommy? Will they do that to me, Mommy? My son was traumatized by that because of the conflict internally for him to see something which created what they call cognitive dissonance. Because I believe cognitive dissonance is simply that I have a set of understandings, I get approached with a new set of understandings which create conflict. Cognitive dissonance. It was cognitive dissonance. My son could not reconcile what he saw, and the result was fear. That's trauma. That's injury. But they don't measure that for my son. So when they see us go through that process, how many people are familiar with Kubler-Ross did a thing on death and dying, and they're the stages of grief when your person finds out they're going to die, right? One of the first stages is denial. And we got black folks that deny they're black, don't we? I mean black folks, they Indian, they mix with it and that and everything. I want to go, you know, you're just black. But they can't be black because they're in denial. You know, we all know it, don't we? Can you imagine a person coming into therapy, and they're going into therapy because they have marital problems or whatever, and the white person standing in front of them don't know that they got that big problem, that they ain't black. Right? Now, here, first of all, you know, we know them because we go, okay. Yeah. But we understand it. You know what I'm saying? We understand it. But you see, that's a family understanding that we have. That we got that. The white person don't know. They go, oh, you're not black? Okay. What you gonna do with that? See? But so denial is one of the phases. It's real, right? But this is what I call the stages of negression or acculturation of being black. You find out you're black. Some folks go into denial about it. Then other people go to another space with it. They get angry. It's natural. There's a period of anger associated with this. And I want you to talk to me about what you think happened, the level of anger. I'm going to give you an example. How many of y'all saw Sankofa? Okay, if you got to see Sankofa. There's a situation that happens in Sankofa, and I use this example because it was pretty deep. There's a situation where there's first of all, you got the slaves, you got the black overseers, you got the mixed overseers, you got the white overseer, and you got the black people there. And what is a little couple? They got a baby on the way, about 8.5 months pregnant, the girl, and they're trying to escape the freedom so that baby is born free. They get caught. So the master, to make an example, has one of the black overseers beat this woman, right? Now I want you to walk through this with me, because he got to, when he finished his job overseeing and cracking the whip, he got to go and have the dinner with the rest of the people in the little slave situation. That's his job. That's what he does. Everybody knows he got to do it because he got a shotgun on him. You know, he tries really hard, you know, not to do the things he tries to avoid, but he can't because that's his job, and he's a slave too. So he starts beating the girl, and they got the gun trained on him, so he has to beat her to death. Now, he lived with her family, loved her. He loves her like he loves all the other children and everybody. He loves this girl, and he got to beat her to death. He beat her to death. And after he beat her to death, all the slaves are there. They wait for the master to go. They deliver the baby because she's full term to save the baby. Right? So now we done saved the baby, this tragic set of events. She's the woman's rocking the baby. He come in. He said, how the baby? Baby, okay. How's everybody doing? This is a man that beat her to death. Comes in. She goes, now you know you can't come around for a couple of days. We know you did what you had to do, but you know it's too hard right now. You just can't come around for a couple of days. Do you understand what he had to do with that? But you know they still loved him because they knew he did what he had to do, and I watched you beat my child to death. I watched you do it, but I knew it wasn't your fault. But what did it do to his heart? What did it do to him to have to come back? They still embraced him. And what did he do with the anger? What did he do with the anger? Where did it go? Where has it always gone? Because it represents itself in the illness. A physical illness that we know that we top the scales on as African-American males. What is it? Hypertension. Talk to me now. That's what we did with the anger. Because I could not overtly express it. I couldn't do anything with it, and it built up in me. Because they say we're so angry. Well, don't we have reason to be? Of course we have reason to be. That's why they were scared of that million-man march. They said, I hope they don't get mad. Because you know they ain't getting mad, right? So I started to deal with that notion of anger, which is one of the symptoms of post-traumatic slave syndrome, is anger. That's also one of them, extreme anger. But it's a justifiable anger, an anger that needs to be dealt with. So when I understand it, I've gone through a phase of anger myself. There was a point where God bless me. I'm a Baha'i. That's my religion. I believe in the oneness of mankind. I truly do. I believe all mankind is one. Spiritually, because you see, we are one race in truth. But I recognize and understand I had some dissonance going on. Joy had some cognitive dissonance. Couldn't do it. Couldn't handle it. I was angry. Didn't want to see white people for a long time, right? I had to deal with my children on that, too. But it was real for me, and I accept it as a phase of my acculturation. Is anger. Matter of fact, I'm not a violent person. I want you to know that. Normally, I'm not. You know what? I think I grew up in the hood, so I grew up in South Central. You had to fight. But I'm not what I think of as a violent person. So I go out with a girlfriend of mine. We go to a club. I don't like to go to clubs. I went because she was in town. We went one of those little things. Okay, we go to a little club, smoke. I want to go home. And I'm there. I'm just, kind of minding my own business, And I overhear this white woman say to another white woman, can you believe he left me for a black girl? I don't know what happens to me. I used to hear about folks carrying on in clubs. I don't even know how I got over there to her. You know what I'm saying? I don't even know how I can't remember the time that I was there. And people were holding me and I wanted to beat her down. Okay, there wasn't no talk about it, curse. I wanted to hurt her. So I understand that anger, right? It's real. My grandmama could go there. When she was 80 years old, she could go there. You could get her there, and we will go there fast, right? But you see, this is part of the faith. I had a brother come to me after a talk. He goes, I don't know if you wanted people to, I'm mad. He said, I don't know if the point was for me to be mad, because I'm mad, right? And I said, well, you know what, brother, I understand that, and it's okay, and I recognize it, and I've been there, but you can't stay there. Because if you stay there, you're going to either implode or explode. It's going to either come in internally, it's going to come out externally, and either way, it's going to hurt you. So you really got to understand that it's real, you got to deal with it, you got to cope with it, and you got to move. So I moved from anger. I understand what that means. But I'm going to give you something. I got to ask the pastor if it's okay for me to say what happened to my husband when they did this. Okay, I'm going to tell you because I don't want to offend anybody. I know I'm in a sanctuary, and I want to tell the truth. So I got to tell you what happened to my husband. And some of those things he said weren't nice. Okay, what happens is my husband, this is recent. I used the example to my dissertation committee. This was just a couple weeks ago that this happened. My husband, who also, grew up in the hood, he grew up in Portland, Oregon, in the little bitty hood that they got. Little bitty hood. Everybody know everybody in little bitty hood. Well, that's where he grew up, And he was at a game with my son. Both my sons are in basketball. One's in 7th grade, one's in the 5th grade. And, he goes to all the games. Saturday, everybody going to games. So he goes to this one where it's a little black team, and they tough. My son is tough in basketball. The boy can do it. And he's got a heart of gold. This is one of the children, you know, you have the children that just is the one you're going to ask what happened, going to tell you the truth. Yeah, this is what happened. The rest of them are looking at him like, I can't believe you told the truth. You know, it's like, but he's the one. You know, not all of them are like that. But this child got a heart of gold, would not hurt a soul, tells the truth, just the one, right? So he plays basketball with all his heart, and he's good. He passes the ball. He's not one of those hogs in the shoot. He's really good team player, all that. This is what we're proud of. We explained to him it's about being able to share and experience it. So they go over to the little white school, right? Now, this is a game before the championship. This is important, and they've been whipping everybody. They got undefeated. Well, there is a referee. He's about 6'5", 250 pounds. White man. He's decided this team ain't going to win. This is the ref. And he starts calling fouls on my son. My husband's watching him, and it's hurting him. He could see it going, you know, you could see it hurting him because he knew it wasn't fair. But he's a kid, and all he could go to is hurt. You know, he couldn't deal with it. So during halftime, my husband goes up to the ref. He does that little athlete thing when they pat you on the butt. I don't understand that. They look pat on the butt. You know, anytime you touch your brother on the butt, any other time you're going to kill you dead. Another man patting him on the butt, but somehow it's okay. I don't understand that. It's the same thing to me when they're in them stalls and everybody talks to the wall. When they're in the stalls in the bathroom, I'm going, yeah, I don't understand that. I'm going to tell you now, the brothers got to explain that to me. When I sent my son, when he was little, into the bathroom, and I didn't know what to tell him. You know, look at the wall. You know, I didn't know what to. I said, do you automatically know to look at the wall? I'm going, you know, why y'all do that to each other? You know, so that little pat on the butt. So he pats the ref, and he goes, hey, ref, let's just get fair about those calls. You know, let's do some fair calls. You know, just kind of give it. And this man walked up to my husband, if you stand up, please, looking down on him, and pushed him in the chest like that and said, don't put your hands on me. Now, this is halftime, middle of the floor, right? My husband, who's 5'10" and a half, looks at him, reaches over, pats him on the butt and says, you need to make some fair calls. He steps into my husband's face, right? Now, my husband steps into his, right, to the point where he presses his face against him. And he says, I don't think you know where you are, who I am, and unless you're serious about that, you better back the fuck off of me. And the man backed up. And then my husband said, and I saw the fear registered in him. I knew he was a punk, so I stepped in. I will whip your butt across this floor, right? And I looked at him, and I said to my husband, and he meant it. And he says, and you know, Joy, if I took him down, he'd have to stay down because he's way too big to let him back up. So now let me explain to you what the media is going to do with that. Man killed because he tapped him in the chest. You hear what I'm saying? Black man kills white man because he tapped him in the chest. But is that why my husband would have took him out? It has nothing, it has to do with him standing there, his son looking at him, and the disrespect he was given. Because we all know what happens when you fraction on that respect code. But that's not what the media would say. You see, look at him. Because then I asked my husband, I said, did the behavior warrant what you were going to do to him? And my husband stopped and said, you know, I never thought about it. Never entered my mind. But we all know it would have been right for him to do. Do you understand what I'm saying? But the rest of the world's going, what, because of a tap? My dissertation committee, the woman, she got it, white woman, she said, you know what? That man would have died never knowing what he did wrong. Because that was a 6'5" white man doing that to my husband. And there was no way that he would have lost his life right there on the floor. And so when I look at that anger, you see, you understand without the context what the problem is? Now, my husband is not a sociopath. He's none of those things, but he would have gone straight to prison. He would not have passed go. He would not have collected $200. He'd have gone straight. Again, because we don't understand that a symptom of it is the anger. So then when we begin to look, I went further. I did a survey in college. I teach college, so I had these students do a survey. I said, I want to find out what would provoke you to violence. I wanted to do a poll of everybody. And they had 4 categories. One was a nonverbal. To something nonverbal, someone flipping you the bird, you know. Well, if you're in proximity of a brother, he might get with you. Did you get with you? Did you? Okay, hey, bring it on, right? And it's just, actually, it's a nonverbal. It's not even, nobody touched you or nothing. And then there's one that is the verbal. Your mama, your daddy, your cousin, let me tell you, all that. Could that provoke you? And then there's the one where someone maybe throws something or spits at you. But don't hit you, just spit at you, right? And then there's one where someone actually hits you or bumps you without actually injuring you, right? And I had them take a poll of all the people that would do. Now, you know which one, how fast we could get there? Do you understand how fast we could get there in terms of getting physically bodily harm? And you got to ask yourself, why is that so? I'm going to give you an example of something that addresses that directly. It's another part of that symptomology in terms of the anger. When I was in Africa, one of the things that happened when I was in South Africa is I dealt with people who, first of all, it was a healing to go. Because I was the first place I could be, the only time I have ever been normal all the time and okay all the time. And that level of love and acceptance I've never known in my life until I was in Africa. Well, one of the things that Africans do, as Dr. Nichols probably shared with you, is they greet. We greet each other. We're serious about greeting, We come in, we hug, hey, and if you're out in public, you know how you're walking around, you see other, people of color, you kind of go, hey, how you doing? Hey, how you doing? In the grocery store, see that? Oh, yeah, how you doing? When I have white people with me, they go, gosh, Joy, you know so many people. I don't know these people, but I am going to say hello, Well, in Africa, that extends out even more. Because in Africa, somebody come in the room, everybody stand up and say hello all the way around. It's just something you do. And one of the terms they use in one of the tribal languages to identify it is they say, I see you. You know how we say, what's up, what's happening, that kind of thing. Well, their greeting is, I see you. And it's, hey, I see you. I see you. And it's a wonderful term, because I heard it over and over again when I was in Africa. Well, when I got back from Africa, I really was clinical. I was in bad shape, didn't want to stay, wanted to go back, cried all the time. My sister started calling, having people call me and say, has she come out yet? How's she doing? I got home, told my children, you don't need another thing in life. And they were like, oh, Lord, this is, oh, Lord, they could see us, I ain't buying you nothing. Nothing. They said, oh, she lost it. Then on top of that, I went in the backyard. I have a garden, but I had a serious garden this time. I had them turn all the soil over. Kids out there, they thought they were sharecroppers. Right? The children out there turning over the soil, right? I made them plant rows of corn, their own row, right? Did the whole thing. And then after we harvested the whole thing, you had to give it all away. I said, I want you to know what it feels like, because I believe you need to custom children to hardship, because it builds their character. I said, I need you to know what it feels like to work hard, to be proud of what you develop, and then give it away. I wanted them to have that experience. And so I was real intense about this stuff, right? I was really right into it. So during this period of time, just got back from South Africa, my kids run in the house. Mom, this boy out there gonna beat up Nadine. And he said he's gonna pee on the car too. And that is very possible in my neighborhood. I said, no, he ain't gonna pee on the car and he ain't gonna beat up Nadine. So I go outside, and this little boy standing in the street with his little crew, right? He's standing, you know how they are when they tough, right? Because now you done brought out your mama, so now I got to fake like I ain't worried about that, right? So I'm looking at him, and I walk up to him. I said, did my son do something to you? I mean, I just need to know, because we could probably fix this thing, I wondered if he had an eyeball problem. I said, what? He said, I just wondered what he was looking at. You got an eyeball problem or something? I said, let me get this straight. You want to beat him down because he looked at you? Well, I just wonder what he's staring at. What? You got an eyeball problem? I said, wait a minute. My son was looking at you. Let's see what maybe the reason why. I said he could have been looking at you thinking, God, this brother might want to play one-on-one because we got this little hoop outside, and maybe we could do that. Or you know, I got a Nintendo game in there. Maybe this brother, I'm looking at this brother because I think maybe he might want to go in. Maybe he was looking at you because we got a park right a block away, and he thought maybe we can go down there and kick it. And he looked at me like, wow, lady, you know, it ain't that deep. You know, because I went therapeutic on it. You know, I went there, right? Because, you know, I'm in this stuff. And so I realized that there was something that had happened to this little boy. Now, I want you to understand. I see you. What you looking at? Talk to me now. This is what we start with. Hey, I see you. I see you. What you looking at? And what that says to me is what I think you think you're looking at is worthy of me hurting you for it. You follow me? I think that whatever you see in me is so bad. You've exposed me that I want to hurt you. How is it that a gaze can provoke that? A gaze. And he's 10 years old. And I've seen it at 5. What you're looking at, what does that mean? What must I feel about who I am? And that takes us to the second symptom, which is vacant esteem. Not low, vacant. Low means we had a threshold and we fell from it. I'm saying it ain't there in our children. And let me tell you why I want to hurt you for it. Because you got vision, don't you? The white person can't see me, but I know you can look into my soul and my heart. I know you can do it, not them. So I want to hurt you for reminding me of what I am. Vacant esteem. Now tell me a white therapist knows what that is. They say, well, low self-esteem means he can do more push-ups than him and he's really upset about it. That's what low self-esteem is to them. Well, you know, he got a B on the test and he got a C and he feels bad. That's not what I'm looking at. That's not what I'm talking about. You understand what I'm saying? And to get to that boy, to be able to help him, you need to understand the basis of that. Post-traumatic slave syndrome. That's what it is. It was one of the most thoroughly destructive things to our people. Was that somewhere deep down in the cavern of our being, we believed ourselves to be inferior. It's a conversation we don't have. Doesn't matter how many degrees you have. Doesn't matter how much money you have. Deep down, you wonder if it's true. That's the incredible thing, and we don't talk about it. That ain't something we say, but it's the truth. It's the truth. When I went to Africa, I met with some women in Botswana. First of all, they started off the whole meeting because we were asking all these, laughing at us. These women, they had been studied in the United States. They were laughing. They said, you believed it, didn't you? You thought you were going to come up in here and see people with swollen bellies and flies. You thought that's what we were, and you thought that's what all of us were about. And they laughed. They cracked up. They said, you think lions come on in, chew us up? You know, they think, all that. He said, you know, you bought it, what white people told you about Africa. Just like we began to buy it when they told us we couldn't walk through your communities without being the drive-by victim. Because that's what they tell us. They said, but we don't buy all that. Y'all bought it. And they started laughing. And one woman said to me, who studied her last year, she's a physician. She's a doctor. She said that her last year she sent for her daughter to come over because she had missed her family. She decided her young daughter, about 5 years old. Daughter comes over to be with her mother that last year of college. One day she runs in to the house. Mommy, crying, just crying. She goes, what's wrong? What's the matter? They call me black, Mommy. They call me black. So mother looked at her and said, Ann? Yeah, I'm black. You know, like that. Okay. So tell me why you're crying. And she said in that instant she realized what had happened to us. And she called her mother on the phone and sent her back the next day on the plane. She said, I didn't let her live a day in this country believing there was something wrong with her blackness. And I said, the difference between you and me is I didn't have no place to send my daughter. You see, that's what happened to us, and it was complete. It was absolutely complete. So as I began to look at those notions, again, the real control group is in Africa. My control group, by the way. I'm going to tell you who they are. I was actually traveling with a number of the people that I was with, the African women, and we went to a village. One guy's name is Gilbert, which is an unusual name, right? Well, what's your name? Is being Gilbert, you know? And his wife's name was Tabitha. Gilbert and Tabitha. And I'm going, well, help me understand. They're both descendants of slaves. Now, Gilbert went back and learned the tribal languages. He said, I'm taking you to a village. I've been going back and helping this village for 8 years. And so he started telling me, you see, slaves were enslaved in South Africa by the Dutch, blacks, Africans from all over. They were taken and they were enslaved right there in Africa by the Dutch. They were taught Afrikaans, so that was the only language they knew. Their names were Elizabeth, Robert, these were their names. They had no affiliation with their tribe, couldn't speak the language, and had been enslaved. It's a place called Onverwacht, which in Afrikaans means unexpected, the unexpected. So I go to this village, and I start seeing a carbon copy of African Americans. Same symptomology, increases in the divorce rate, drug and alcohol, all of the symptomology. Because you see, when they took the culture, which I could prove now, that there is a specific behavior that follows the destruction of culture of these people, no matter where they are. They're my control group. That's who I got to go back and say, you see, the same thing happens because the relationship is so critical for us. So now I'm looking again at symptomology. Somebody tell me time, because I know I'm on a... Okay, I have to when? 10:15. Okay, 10, said 10, because I know that this is important. Okay, I need to run through this quickly. Okay, let's move real quickly on in terms of the symptomology, and I can tell you a little bit about, because I got to get into how we fix this. Okay, so one of the other symptoms that I see is a behavior that you will notice that happens with African American people a lot. If you see African American mother in a bank right now, and she has children around her, 3, 4, 5-year-old children, that kind of age group, where are the children in proximity to her? Sometimes they're literally adhered to the mother. As the mother moves, they move right lockstep with her, right? And then if they should try to move, get your, and then all of a sudden they're right there. Now I'm observing this behavior. Same bank, white mother. Children, honey, come back. No. You don't, I'm sorry. Put that down. Come in. Kids sliding down, And here's the same bank, same mother, the child looking, and Johnny sliding down the aisle. It's so deep that when the mother goes to the teller, because this is a child's chance to escape. All of us know. You look for that moment. Mama's occupied. I'm lower than the little counter. I can just slide on down when nobody see me. I can get off, right? Now I'm standing there. But in the line, there's another black mother. Now, she don't know this other woman or her child, but when she see that child slide away, she gives her that death stare that only black mothers can give. The child looks at her and goes, right back in, right? And what that behavior is, this mother got her back. She's taking care of it. It's part of community. It's part of what we learned. It's social learning. It's what we adapted to. But here we got to ask the question. If I walk up to the mother and say, how come you're not letting that child, explore, which is normal, by the way. In order for a child to develop emotionally and mentally, they need to explore. It's a natural phenomenon of human development. They walk up, hi, what's your name? Gosh, that's an interesting color you have on. Is that, you just ask you all kind of questions. It's how they take in their environment. So we're actually stifling that development when we say no. But when I ask her, how come you won't let him go? She don't really have an answer because that's what she was in the bank. We don't know why we do it. But what Johnny gets in 1998 is okay. It's okay for him because it's his world. I can't do it because we'll get in trouble. It's not for me. No one said it, but that's the message that child gets. So now when we look at that behavior, we have to understand it in the context of adaptation. We have to understand that was appropriate because, there was a time you would get in trouble. There was a time when everything could break down right there in that child. You'd beat them before you let them move. Okay, so now we have another phenomenon that happens. This is very common. And again, I went to the mirror on this one. How many people saw Soul Food? It also happened in that movie. I'm going to let you know. Because it's so familiar to us that we wrote it into script. You have a white mother. You come up to the white mother. You say, my God, that Johnny yours, he is surely doing well. She goes, oh, yeah. He's quite the man. He's in the talented and gifted program. He's in Little League, and he's so much like his uncle. I think he's going to be an engineer. Got to cut her off. She's so proud. She's just bubbling with pride. You got to stop her, right? Black mother, same attributes, same qualities, same thing. And I'm tempting to praise her. White woman says to the black, that Johnny of yours is really coming along. Yeah, girl, but you see it butt at home. He's a mess. Girl, you should have. Honey, yeah, well. She's proud, isn't she? She really is proud, and she really is happy, but it's not coming off verbally. And that's why white people go, you know, they're so harsh with their children. They're so negative. Why is she doing it? Because you know why I knew? Because I had a knee jerk. It almost like, don't pray. Yeah, right, yeah. Why? It's knee jerk. I don't know where it came from. But then I started to do the research. I started reading slave history and all of that. And let's roll it back. Let's roll it all the way back to slavery. And I'm the white master, and this is the mother, and those are her children. You know what? That Johnny is really coming along. What is she going to say to the master? Oh, no, master, he's shiftless, he's stupid, he's lazy, he can't do nothing because she don't want him what? Don't sell my baby. I don't want you to sell him. So I denigrate him to keep him with me, and that is adaptation, which is appropriate. But what did it do to Johnny? And what does it do to Johnny in 1998? But nobody stopped and said, let's do that mass therapy. Well, let's get rid of some of those behaviors of adaptation that we no longer need. No one did that for us, you see? So those behaviors, and there are a million more that you know that I can't even remember. But if we don't look at them, if we don't understand them, if we don't do this work, then we will never get to it. And I know, do you think somebody white can? I keep saying that, and it doesn't suggest that other people can't be good therapists, but without the understanding of culture, you actually injure people. You do the absolute opposite. Everything in my clinical training, I have to go completely against. Everything about therapy, all of it, I got to go completely against, because I understand what my people need to do to heal. And sometimes when you get in them little rooms in the therapy when they tell you to bare your soul, guess what happens when a black person says to you, let me show you my scar and how I got it. What do I expect you to do next? Show me yours. Because I need to know that you understand that you are undefeated too. You are not undefeated. You are not undefeated. Just like I'm not undefeated, you're not undefeated. And you've showed it to me because you showed me your scar too. Well, that's called, you're not supposed to get in that close with clients. That's sharing. That's inappropriate. That's transference, and you're not dealing with your separate. You excuse me if I'm showing you all my scars? I'm expecting you to show me you got some too. Because it validates our humanity. But that ain't what I teach me in therapy, because you see it's a man-object oriented system. Okay. So I can't go through all the symptoms, but let's look at some of the cures. I told people when Dr. Nichols explained to me about axiology, I wrote a model. The model is called in there. You have access to this model. I gave it, it's here, so if you want to see it. But the model is called the relationship model of education. So what I've done is adapted that model, and I'm creating a relationship model of therapeutic intervention. It's a relationship model because relationship people. Well, I did develop this model, and what do you think the first thing white people did when they got it? What did they have to do with it? Measure it. To the tune of $50,000, they called in Northwest Regional Educational Laboratories to measure my model to see if it worked. First of all, I already knew it worked. I don't care what they were going to do. And what they discovered, indeed, the children who got this particular model, who were in the school system, got an increase in grade point average, an increase in parental involvement, a decrease in negative referral systems, and an increase in overall retention. Now, what was it? Did the people I hired, because I hired the staff. I screened them. Most of them were men that I hired. Worked in elementary, middle, and high school. And my key component, I don't care, did I care if they had degrees? No. What I wanted to know is one thing: can you develop a relationship with children? Can you love them? Because if you don't love them, I don't want you near them. That was a criteria. Can you develop a relationship? I wrote 6 standards. You know how when you walk in the classroom it says don't spit, jump, kick, use your outside voice, all those things? Punitive for our kids. I wrote some standards because we were created noble. God created us noble. I believe you're noble. Now, we don't always behave in a noble way, but I know you are noble. It's a different perspective, and I want to deal with that vacant esteem, don't I? Because I'm telling my children you're noble. So there are 6 standards that I gave to them in this program called the Self-Enhancement Program, and the initials SEI. First standard number 1, in SEI, we greet each other every day with a smile and a handshake to strengthen the relationship between us. So at the door, in my classrooms, every child is greeted. I don't know how they can be mad at 7 a.m., but sometimes they are. I don't know what done happened between here and home, but you going to stand in this door, smile at me, and shake my hand today. It's real hard to be ugly after that. So they're at the door, and that's to establish what? The relationship. Okay, standard number 2. In SEI, we honor and respect each other, and so we address one another with proper language and speech. There ain't going to be no cursing, swearing, calling him stupid, coming all out, because we are noble people. And we address one another because we're noble with proper language and speech. Number 3, in SEI, we value the space of ourselves and others and are careful not to intrude or injure each other. That means ain't nobody going to hit nobody, push anyone, do anything to them. In SEI, number 4, we are mindful of what is true and strive to be honest in both word and deed. That means you can't steal nothing, you can't lie on nobody, none of that, because we're noble. Number 5, in SEI, we treasure our rich culture and we hold the cultures of all people in high regard. In SEI, number 6, we strive to reflect our beauty, both inwardly in our understanding and outwardly in our appearance. You ain't coming in sagging. You're going to come in groomed. All of those things. You understand what I'm saying? Okay, so those 6 standards handled every infraction that these children could do, without saying, don't spit, jump, climb, use your outside voice. None of that, because they were noble. And it was a way of restoring the sense of esteem and at the same time instilling in them a sense of integrity. So now, I had to teach teachers who they were. Because, teachers think, well, I'm just a teacher. Now, if you think about the best teacher you've ever had, and some of you are those best teachers, you think back to who they were. What did they have with you? A relationship. They cared about you. They talked to you. They listened to you. So I told teachers, you got some roles. You're not just one thing. You are, yes, instructor. You are also parent. And you are mentor. You're all of those. Because if Johnny crawling over the table and I got to correct him, I say, you need to sit yourself in that chair right now. Which one of these do I need to be? That's right, because our kids, the first thing they say when you tell them that you ain't my mama, you are, I am today. And if you can't go into parent, you can't correct me. Because, there's something that a child will receive from a parent. And there's a reason why. There's only one reason why a child accepts the discipline of a parent is because they know that parent what? Loves me. And if you love me, I'm going to do whatever you ask me to do. And that's why I'll allow you to correct me. I can correct them out and get yourself over here right now. I'm in the street. I ain't even in the school. Because they respect that relationship. They know I love them and I got their back. But I'm going to get you a little behind if you don't get over here and sit down, So they know that about me, right? Now I'm in the mall. I'm just floating around, shopping like everybody else. They see me in the mall. My kids see me in the mall. Which role am I in? Oh, there's my teacher. That's Miss Leary. Hi, Mom, that's Miss Leary. That's how it should be. I'm always in a role. You see what I'm saying? So I had to teach these teachers. They're going, I wasn't taught to be a social worker. I said, I'm not asking you to be a social worker. I'm asking you to love our kids, and this is how they can receive it. Instead, they do things like this. They say, well, if you're really, really good, you do your homework, I'm going to give you a star. Or a little smiley face, right? And most of the kids, the little white kids, say, yay, I got 3 stars. Ooh-wee, I want to get another one tomorrow. Our kids will go, I can make my own star. For a nickel, so I'll sell you a star. See? Because a star ain't going to motivate me. And it doesn't mean that I don't want to learn, that I don't care about you, and I'm not a motivated learner. It means that ain't the thing to motivate me. But I tell you what will. I say, Johnny, come here. This is my Johnny. I'm so proud of him. He did his homework last week, and I know he's going to do his homework this week because we know he can do it. Johnny will work for that. He'll work for the relationship because he wants to please me. You see? And those are the things I have to teach teachers. But the biggest problem was that takes too much time. 3 months. So when we look at these things, you see, that's a therapeutic motive. Now I got to switch real quickly, and how much time I got? I got 7 minutes? Okay. I can do it. 7 minutes, okay. This is something that takes more time. And I understand, but life, we can do this. It's going to be all right. I'll be around. so here's what I realized in terms of a therapeutic model. There are certain notions that happen. Now we've moved to families coming in for therapy. Whatever the issue is, whatever the problem is, I already know I'm looking for post-traumatic slave syndrome. I know it's there, and I don't know how it impacted this family. But the way I find out how it impacted this family is I do the genogram. I'm going to find out who mama is and who daddy was he there, who wasn't, who died, all that, and then down to the client. This is how we got here with you. But there's something else I find out from the client. I find out how your family survived and sustained through slavery. And we can always know that because there's only about 4 ways how we did it. First was through the church. Everybody in the family, a pastor, a minister. 18 of them. Everybody knew that that's how you gonna make it. We got to stay with the church and with the Lord and we'll make it. That's one way. The other way was we're going to educate our way out. You get that good education, you can get the job, you can take care of yourself. It's a way to survive. That was the way out. The other was entrepreneurs. You know those families, it's like the Jamaican families, everybody got a job. We're going to find a way to sell you something because we're going to have a business. And that's a sense that people had. And there were always those of us that had the barbershops, and they just had them, set them up, and we had them. And during segregation, we did quite well, as a matter of fact. We did better than we've ever done because we had to rely on one another. We only had one bank, and that's how it went. Okay, so now we got the entrepreneur, we got the education, we got the church, then you got the criminal. Okay, now I'm going to tell you the truth. And a combination of those. My family, I'll be real clear with you, was education and criminal. My Uncle Warren, we don't know how he did it. The man had a brand new Eldorado Cadillac every year and could not write his name. Now, Uncle Warren financed everybody going to school. And we didn't ask where he got the money from, okay? We didn't ask. But I had Uncle Warren and Uncle Raymond and all these folks, and we know they was criminals. They was doing something wrong, and we said, okay, but, that's how we did it. And other families are different levels and combinations of that. And based on that, I understand what was the integrity of your family, because in this criminal world, also what came out of it was drugs and alcohol. Okay, and we know what that did to our families, right? And I believe a sister came here before and talked about our propensities for alcoholism. So we're looking at that. And alcoholism actually floated in and out of all of these because we had to cope. And so you look at that mixture, and I begin to understand what level of post-traumatic slave syndrome and how it introduced itself into your family and how you cope. So now I can begin to understand what the therapeutic process should be. I understand all of that. I understand how you arrived at your character. I understand how your mother arrived at, because you say, my grandmother, bless her heart, but she was mean. She was always angry, and she would beat us, and, all of a sudden, I'm going, but, she suffered from post-traumatic slave syndrome, right? I'm beginning to understand how it broke down for you, the level of resilience of this family, the strengths of this family, the needs of this family. Now, I'm going to end with a little story that had happened with me when I was teaching. One day, a little girl came in, because I was in this program, they would call me in when anything looked strange. They go, Joy, there's a little girl, 2nd grade, we need you to look at her, because we don't know if she's special, we don't know what's up. So she would come in the classroom. First of all, she would be dirty, she'd be unkept, she wouldn't talk to any of the kids. She would come in, put a coat over her head, and put her head on the desk all day. I said, wait a minute, how'd she get a 2nd grade doing that, right? But I'm watching her, and I observe her in the classroom. And so the teacher, who's a male, he's like a real towering male, he goes, tell me what to do. Sweet, upstairs. I said, all I want you to do is do the first standard, smile and a handshake. That's all I want you to ask of this little girl. Insist upon it when she comes to the door. So she would come, he'd go, okay, gotta look at me. Come on, look at me, smile. And she'd do it. Go to the desk, put the coat over her head, right? That's all he would do. A couple months went by. After a while, she started looking forward to that at the door. She looked forward to it, but she still, when she got to the desk, she put, So I said, okay, we have a rally every quarter. So we're getting ready to have our spring rally. And we give awards to the kids. Now, with the PTA, we had about 5%, representation of parents. We had 75 to 90%. Parents would come, mama, grandmama, everybody would come because their children were, for the first time, were awarded. And so I told him, for her category of 2nd grade, you need to give her Most Improved Student Award. You with me? Most improved, because she get to the door and she shook your hand and smiled. And so he said, okay, but he said that's not enough. So he told his wife about the little girl. And his wife made a life-size rag doll. Beautiful, life-size black rag doll. And so we had the big meeting, and then we had what was known as a parental component, where we had a parent coordinator that would go into the home when we had a child that had an issue, because you can't separate the child from the family. So we dealing with the mama and the daddy, and guess what? Mama on crack. Mama on crack, so the first thing the parent coordinator does is get her in a treatment. Mama gets cleaned up. Mama starts a halfway house for women, running it now. She got most improved parent award. Gave her award too. So now we got the parent working. Rally comes. Mama comes in. Whew, never has she attended. Little girl cleaned up with bows in her hair. Cleaned up, because mama cleaned up. So they sitting in the back, and they announce the award for this little girl. From the stage, he says, Most Improved Student Award. And he unwraps this life-size rag doll. And each child then walks up, but she couldn't get out the seat. I gotta stop, because I'm gonna tell you, this is so hard for me. What I feel when I see this little girl, I cannot tell you. So because she couldn't come down, he walked down with the doll. He walked down, the whole audience turns to look at this little girl. And her mother and her are nervous, and she's beaming, and he hands her the doll, and she smiles, and she pulls the coat over her head. That little girl later on was standing up and reading aloud in front of the class. Now tell me if I care if she went from an F to a D. I don't care if she did, because she cannot get to the D if she don't raise her head. She got to raise her head, and that's a victory. So that is the healing. The healing is right here with us. And I end as I end with all my trainings, with all of the movements that I have with people and my connections with people. It was best said in the color purple. Everything just want to be loved. Thank you very much. Thank you.
We want to thank God this morning for the presence of this sister, this educator, and this doctor, but also as I was saying, we want to thank God this morning for the presence of this sister, this educator, but also this healer in our midst. And as Pastor continues to drive home to us his desire for us to become and to see ourselves as a congregation, a leadership congregation, I think that we need to add to that also, that he also needs us to be a healing congregation. We're receiving this information both for self-reflection, but also to learn how to use this information when we witness or minister to other brothers and sisters and family members in our communities. Earlier this week, there was a brother who was frustrated, and Eldad Medad, because there are some brothers he wants to get here, and they don't want to come here. And the point that I made to him is, you don't have to bring them here. Take the information to them. Take the church to them where they are. Meet them where they are, and let the Lord decide how he wants to work it from there to draw them to this place. So once again, we want to give God a praise for her presence, for her being here for the second time. And what I would like to do is, she opened up with prayer for herself, but also for us. If I can have a couple of elders down here, would like to pray with her, for her, before she leaves. Could I have some elders come down, please? I'd like to meet with the brothers from the Warrior Council and Osafo downstairs in the men's ministry office right after we're dismissed from here. Let us pray together. We're beginning to recognize and see far more clearly, oh God, what you're beginning to do with us and for us. There are times in which you bless our pastor with certain visions that are not immediately clear to us. but we thank you for the patience and for your faithfulness unto both the vision and the man and to your congregation. We thank you for this sister, for Joy. We thank you for her sense of purpose, for the passion that she has for her work and the love for her people. We ask you that you may continue to bless her, continue to lift her up and raise her up to higher heights. But we also ask that you may open up doors for her to bring this information to our people in places where we may not be able to reach, where others may not be able to reach, but where you need her to be. We ask you all of this in the name of Jesus. Amen. Thank you. Good day. I believe copies, we're going to have tapes on this?
God bless you.
Okay, tapes should be available on this, I believe, tomorrow. Please get a copy and maybe an extra copy for friends. Yeah, and we need you to leave the sanctuary because we have a baby that